Well, live again. Very, very cool. How is that? All right. So Zombiepalooza Radio live. I know every time I look in the monitor here, this thing looks like it's backwards, but I'm like really thrilled that when it comes out to your end, those who are listening, it comes out the right way. All right. So another thing that's coming out the right way, we have somebody that's a very, very special co-host for this evening. His name is James Barker. James Barker has basically been with us for not quite as long as the show has started, but he's got a good amount of time. We're 5 years this year. I think he's got at least 3.5 years as part of, in one way or another, is part of this show. So, hey, welcome back to the show, James Barker.
Thank you so much for having me back.
Hey, you know what? We got a lot of really, really cool things to talk about on this really, really cool show. And so one of them is going to be, I think, if our one guest on Third Hour does not show, we will be interviewing you and your acting experience and what you think about this show and different kinds of things from the indie world, because you are, of course, an actor. I don't know how many people actually know that, but we're going to talk a little bit probably on Third Hour, and we're gonna hopefully have things going the way they need to go. There's been a little bit of shake up last minute, kind of like my last 4 or 5 hours right before show, trying to be able to get particular things going and moving the right way. What we try to do the most here is accommodate our guest, and sometimes there are particular things that we need to do to make them, as comfortable as they possibly can be, and other times we just get them on there and just grill them, put them to the wall. What the heck? Why not, right? Let's see. All right, our lineup that I hope I have. I don't know. I'm gonna try. Our first hour, we are going to have Ryk Spoor. He is going to be our regular on this show. He does interview very, very well, and we are always encouraged by having someone that is very happy to be on the show. And I tell you what, the show is really important for those who are indie creatives because it gives them a platform. We also run a pretty tight ship here. We have particular questions that we ask, and we make sure that we get as much expression out of these guests as we possibly can. And what I mean by that is finding out a little bit more about how they create and why they do. Sometimes some of our guests actually get to be put on panels and go to conventions, and you get to see them. And some of the questions that are asked there are real repetitive, and they can kind of get very tiring if our guests have been to a lot of cons. And so what we do is we try our best to be able to get things that are more interesting, maybe a little bit more in depth, maybe a little bit more innovative, and so that's what we're going to try and do this evening. So Ryk Spoor, he's going to be on our first hour in about a minute to 5 minutes, depending. Our second guest is an individual that my husband, Kenneth Chin, met quite some years ago. He is very innovative as far as creating things like knives and other weapons to be able to help you survive in a apocalyptic situation and or just regular life. If you're going out, if you like being able to test different kinds of things as far as devices out in the wilderness and that kind of thing, he's really good at that. He's also very well respected in his community, and I think you're really going to enjoy from a survival standpoint. That's going to be on my second hour. Third hour, I am supposed to have Charles Phipps. Now, I don't know if he is available. There may be something that happened and he just wasn't able to get back to me. If he does not get back to me, then we're going to have our current guest co-host James Barker on, and he's going to talk about acting and the indie scene from what he knows also too about this show. And then on our fourth hour, we're going to have a brand new author. She goes by the name M.L. Spencer, and she doesn't necessarily do apocalyptic, but I'm pretty sure that you're going to like what she has. And we're very excited. We are always excited to be able to bring new people onto the show and expand into different areas. So I'm going to go ahead and send a link to Ryk and James, if you want to come in and have a little say-so while I'm going and doing that, that would be really great.
Okay. I do remember hearing some stuff while watching our show. While you're watching, make sure you like, subscribe, share, hit that bell for notifications.
Please and thank you.
Please and thank you. Yes.
Yes. Please and thank you.
5 years, Jackie.
I know,
wow.
Right? Tonight it's like I've never done this before, so I'm like, I gotta get the.
I feel like it's the first time for me again.
When was the last time we actually had you on?
Oh, a couple months back. Kind of popped in. Hey, how you doing?
All right, so I sent his link. The Gmail, and I am going to.
And we are live.
Hi, sorry.
How did that happen?
No, that's an old show.
Oh, so I bring him on here, and he's like, I know what I'm doing.
No, I just going over seeing how you actually look on the regular YouTube.
Okay, I think he's on his way. I'm hoping he's on his way. Gmail is fun. This show is all run on Google Hangouts, Gmail, and all this other kind of fun stuff. So sometimes it's a little bit interesting to try and get these people into the room itself. If he comes in while I'm on a different page, let me know.
I will do.
Thank you very much. Click the link. Liz. We're waiting.
So, are you ready for this wonderful holiday? Oh, there he is.
I can't wait for Halloween, actually. That's going to be like really totally cool. Something else that's really totally cool is I never take for granted that people are actually going to be able to get in while the show is live because, that just sometimes doesn't happen the right way. But in this case, it happened right the way it's supposed to. We have with us Ryk Spoor, and he is an author. He's also very talented as an author, and we always enjoy having him on. And yes, he will be a regular.
Good to be back. Good to be back. Hi.
Good. All right, so I have with us tonight, James Barker. He was one of
the
originals.
You're dropping in and out.
Okay, I'm just gonna go with how it is because there's nothing I can do about that
Okay.
right now. All right, so James Barker has been basically with the show for about I don't know, 3.5 years, maybe a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, kind of sort of from the beginning, he was a guest when I first brought him on. He was actually part of the show that's supposed to be starting again tomorrow. It's called The Walking Dead, and he was a indie actor on that. So, James, this is Ryk. Ryk, this is James.
Good evening,
Hi,
Ryk.
James.
How you doing?
All right, yourself?
I'm well. A little chilled, but I'm well here.
You're cold over there?
Yeah. I'm a Florida boy. I'm up in the mountains.
Yeah, right.
Anything under 60 is cold.
No. Over up here in New York, it's still at like 70. So
I think that's
don't
what
know.
it is here too. Because I'm like on a, I rarely go in a t-shirt kind of thing, but I'm like I'm comfortable, and I'm usually freezing. All right, so let's get to this. Tell people whom have not gotten to meet you yet, right? What it is that you do, and the genre that you create in, and what else that you've gotten yourself into as far as indie creative.
Well, I write. I'm an author, science fiction, fantasy of pretty much all stripes. I've covered everything from hard science fiction to epic fantasy, urban fantasy, um, and pretty much everything in between in one way or another. Um, my books have been published by Baen Books, but I've got one independent myself called Polychrome, and I have two coming from Double Dragon next year, written with my wife Kathleen, and the other one completely mine.
You also
So that's where I come from.
That you also, though, one of the reasons why I can bring you on again and again and again and again, because you have different levels in mathematics and science, psychology, information science, and you're also, a bookseller, of course, production
I'm weird.
manager, and what's an R&D coordinator at International Electronic Machines?
I do many things there. Technically, I was originally there just to write technical proposals, basically to say, here's some neat stuff that we think we could do, and if you just pay us for it, we do it. The government and other organizations put out what are called solicitations for these kind of things, and if an organization thinks they can fulfill this research and development work, then they submit a proposal, and that was my job. Well, it still is my job. Then if people say yes and say, here's the money, then I also will help administrate what they do, make sure that the engineers are doing their work, and I write the reports and oversee all the research that's being done. Range from stuff for military to of the government agencies here in New York State, and a lot of them in between.
You also are an RPG game consultant, a proofreader, and an editor, and probably take care of the kitchen sink and the air conditioning and the electric.
I hire people for the kitchen sink. I hire people for the kitchen sink. That's not my thing.
All right, so very interesting though. RPG game consultant. I've had a number.
That was a long time ago. I haven't had much chance to do a lot of that. Although though it looks like we'll be making a role-playing game out of my Grand Central Arena series. I'm hoping that we'll be able to officially announce on that soon, but favorable that we'll be able to go forward and do that.
Well, cool. All right. So what I like about this particular kind of background is it's very flexible. I could talk about how you create and how your background has been able to give you the ability to be able to go deeper into your creative process. Would I be off by saying that?
I missed the last part of it because of the breakup.
Okay, so your background, because you have lots of different hard sciences, when you're writing your materials, it makes it a little bit easier for you to be able to create your characters and design the backdrops for these characters.
Yes, I use a lot of the stuff that I've either learned in school or learned from my current job in constructing the worlds, the people sometimes, although mostly that's from meeting people, having interactions with them. Then you say, oh, I need a character that's sort of like that, inspires me. But certainly building the worlds, building the puzzles that they may have to solve, whether they're people puzzles or not, there's usually some element of the world involved with that. For example, the most obvious influence was when I was working at IEM. I've learned a great deal about sensors and data processing relative to those things and so on. And that was absolutely key in writing the Boundary series with Eric Flint. He needed somebody who could provide a feel of solidity. I mean, when you're doing hard science fiction, it's really important that you can give the reader that you have some idea of what the hell you're talking about.
Right. All right. Let's talk a little bit about that, because sometimes I get people on that think that they can just go and take a particular kind of trope for a work, and then think that if they don't need to do the research in it. They all they need to do is put the major pieces of what is involved in that particular genre, and they think that they can bring something together that everybody is going to like. Tell me why that is a fallacy. Right? That just doesn't happen.
Well, can do that if what you're trying to do is something that will be presented to people quickly, and you're just trying to hit the emotional impressions and notes that they want to hear. Survive any kind of scrutiny. If you want somebody to read it or watch it and then say, boy, that was good, I want to see it, I read it or whatever again, to hang together. If you're setting it in the real world, that means that if you present real things, those things have to be believable. Sure, you'll make mistakes. And in fact, the saying that I always have about that, I don't even know where it came from, but it may go back to Mark Twain, which is, don't know that gets you. It's what you do know that ain't so. Because if you know something, you say, geez, maybe I better look that up. But if you're sure of something and you're wrong, it's you. And you will be sure about something and you will be wrong and you'll screw it up. That's okay as long as having the confidence to believe that, well, most of the time you do look into this, and so if this is a mistake, it's just an honest, oh, oops, everybody makes mistakes, rather than this guy didn't give a crap and he didn't bother with the work.
Now, believe it or not,
yeah,
believe it or not, though, I've had people come on to my show and say, I ask them, how they create what they do, and is it difficult? And some people have said, oh, I just sit down at my keyboard and I type a bunch of words and I send it off, and it sounds very robotic almost.
Well, in a way, I could say that about a lot of my stuff. But what I'm leaving out when I say that is, well, for example, with my Phoenix trilogy, Phoenix Rising, Phoenix and Shadow, and Phoenix Ascendant. Those are, epic fantasy. A lot of the time people will say, well, fantasy, that means it's magic, you can do whatever you want. again, it's got to be consistent inside its world. And what I'm not saying, if I say, oh, I just sat down, and I typed those, what I'm leaving out is that I've been working on that world for 40 years. I built it over 40 years. So I literally can. If you say, would you write a story set in that world? And you said, here, I've got $5,000, write me a book tomorrow. Sit down, start it tomorrow. I could do that because I've already done 40 years of work and it's all up there.
Right.
Done that. And you just are pulling it out. David Gerald, actually, he was describing when he was writing some of the Star Trek stuff, I think it was. And he said, got this little guy in the back of your head. Say, okay, send me a plot. But he'll grab the easiest thing that's sitting right on top, and he'll throw you the most hackneyed plots, the easiest plot points, the quickest thing that he can think of. And your job is to keep telling him, no, send me something better. Your back brain to say, okay, no, something that's hackneyed and trite. I've still got to put a spin on it. I got to give it a twist that other people haven't seen, or to do that thing so much better than everyone else that they say, yeah, I've seen that a billion times before, and you know what? That was still awesome.
Right, and it's difficult to
but
do
it's
that.
hard.
It is very difficult to do that. Like this damn show. I've
I know.
been doing this for 5 years, but sometimes it feels like I just started yesterday because I do my best to be able to bring on things that are interesting, and nobody wants to be bored, and I want to be able to keep people interested. And even though I do bring people on sometimes repeatedly in very short durations, what I try to do most is be able to pull something else out of it so that it is not exactly the same questions or maybe even the the same techniques for it. All right,
Yeah.
so we've not really touched too much on your world building process. Now, I know that you write manga and anime.
Well, not manga.
Manga.
I use manga. I have read a lot of it, watched a lot of it, and then I throw this stuff into my work. But in order to write manga, I'd also have to be an artist, and that I ain't.
All right. So then the works though that you use for the world building process, is this something that when you look at that, it gives you inspiration to be able to help your world building process?
I like to be more honest and say that I steal stuff shamelessly from everyone that I encounter. And if I'm afraid that the shameless theft is going to be noticed, I have a mental file and I file off the serial numbers that are on it so that people look and say, you stole that. Can you prove it? No. And by doing that, it goes back.
People have actually, though, said, some of them actually entrepreneurs that are very successful have said that they don't necessarily invent the something, but what they do is they take the something that's there and make it better, put their spin on it, or try to be able to create another universe around that particular idea.
And that is exactly true. As Isaac Newton said hundreds of years ago in one of his letters, he said, if I have seen farther, it is because I have stood upon the shoulders of giants. And that's true if you're writing stories, too. I couldn't write an epic fantasy without acknowledging the fact that I've read Tolkien. I mean, he's the giant that looms up over everyone. Even if you don't like him, even if you think that his stuff is crappy and you want to write something you think is better, that every single epic fantasy ever written is going to be looked at and then compared with what J.R.R. Tolkien wrote. And the same thing is true of many other fields, that you end up having to take these tropes, these ideas, and you can mix them together and you can assemble them like Legos in different ways. And then you try to paint your Legos so that they look really different and cover up the fact that they're just blocks you've joined together. And the question is, how well do you do that? In general, there aren't any new ideas. Yes,
Right.
every once in a while one comes along, but I think there have been 4 or 5 in my lifetime. I haven't had any of them. I haven't created something brand new. At best, what I do with my stuff is I come up with a new way to connect these 10 ideas so that people look at it and say, oh, I haven't seen anybody quite do that. Um, for example, I did one in which it's a common thing that people have done where exposure to a really evil thing will slowly turn you evil. I inverted that in Phoenix and Shadow and let the demons be exposed to too much good, so that they were slowly turning good and losing people to the corruption of good and nice and everything, and desperately trying to fight off this disease. But that's not really new. People have done that before, but it was unusual enough that people remarked on it and said, oh, that's kind of cool. I haven't seen that done very often. But that's really what it boils down to. Most of the time you've got maybe 100 ideas that you use, and 99 of them are ones that you know where they came from and that wasn't from you. And one of them is you came up with it. And most likely, if you take that one idea and you go back, you find out somebody else did it in 1909.
All right. So, hard science fiction. Talk about
Hard
what
SF.
hard SF means.
Well, if you ask 20 people in the field, you'd probably get 19 different answers. The one that I have heard most often that seems most useful in terms of defining a genre is that hard science fiction is the subgenre of science fiction in which you adhere to what we believe is possible. So you can't have magic, and you can't have, quote, science that does stuff that we have no idea how it could work. So in general, that says no faster than light drives. I mean, there's a couple of, sort of wrinkles, and maybe you can get away with it if all you're doing is just using that to get from here to there. But in general, you stick with what actually is possible, not necessarily with what's practical. And it could be something where, well, we know you can do this, but you need a Jupiter-sized mass of something in order to do that. Well, yeah, that's possible, and you can use that in hard science fiction. What you can't do is, just wave your hands and create some technology that overcomes a physical barrier that we have no idea would be possible to overcome.
All right. So you do though use sacrifice and symbology in your writings. So I want you to talk a bit about each one of those and why it's so important to what you do.
Sacrifice and symbology? Making sure I heard it because it was a little broken up. Okay. I am not nearly as, what would you call, literary a writer as many. So I'm often not thinking carefully about all the symbology in my work. But it is there. Sacrifice is one of the most important factors in a couple of my stories, most notably Princess Holy Aura coming out now. It's one of the major themes of how you gain strength by what you're willing to give up. But that also exists in some of my others. The importance is to, in my view anyway, is to make sure that it isn't sacrifice in some sort of, I don't know, smarmy sense where, oh, look at what they've sacrificed, but it's actually what you are giving up because it's important to you. It's not that you've suffered, it's why you've done so. The symbology, I use a lot of different categories of symbology. Magic, I will often come up with things that resonate with me and hopefully with other readers. The elements often play a part because that goes back to on both sides of the pond, both the East and the West have their own ideas of the elements of the world. And I've used both aspects of that. My most common one is the 5 element setup of earth, air, fire, water, and spirit. I have used the idea of various virtues. I have virtues. We have the deadly sins and the virtues. I have a version of those in Grand Central Arena that I invented specifically for an alien race, which you can look at them, you can see that they're similar to ours, and that human beings could grasp them and say, yeah, okay, those are virtues and those are, but they're not identical. So I get to play with the symbology in there, because if you have of what is good and bad, it allows you to do somewhat different things with the story, following the standard 7 deadly sins,
Right.
such.
All right. So, James, do you have any questions for our first guest?
Yeah, I'd scroll over and push the mute button, but yeah.
Oh,
Stupid mic.
he's new to this. It's not
Oh,
the buttons.
I'm never mind. Not getting into it. Ryk, when you do your research, what's the process of doing it? I mean,
The process of researching it?
yeah.
Well, partly, I guess it would depend on what I'm researching. I mean, some things is pretty straightforward. Like when I was doing the Boundary series with Eric, I had to find out, well, what are things like on Mars? Because I'm going to be sending people to Mars. So that's actually fairly straightforward. You find some people who do a lot of studying of Mars, and you call them up and you talk to them, and they refer you to, oh, here's all these papers and these books and so on. And when I need to find out about what Europa was like for Threshold and Portal, there's like a whole book written, a couple of books written by people just about Europa. So I had a wealth of detail about that, and I could ask people online. James Nickel, for example, reminded me about the way in which you do orbital burns in order to accelerate and decelerate. If you're researching something that isn't real, so to speak, it gets much hairier, because then it's not so much research, but figuring out what makes sense in context of the story, consistent that you can keep, that you can remember and keep doing that through the book, and what won't ruin your plot. That's actually one of the hardest ones in any fictional setting. There's always a temptation, especially if you're doing adventure type stuff, to get your people out of trouble. That's actually one of my biggest problems. I had to be reminded by other authors, remember, never make it easy on your characters. No matter how much you sympathize with them, say, no, I don't want to do that to them. It's going to hurt them. Oh. And therefore, you try to get them out of it. Well, sometimes if you just provide a way to get them out of a problem, you have to look at it real carefully and say, and how many more problems will this get them out of so that you will never be able to get them into trouble again? Because really, if you can't get them into trouble, what kind of a story have you got?
Mm-hmm.
They all sit around and everything was fun, and that's it.
Sometimes you have to let that character go through like a really rough process, though, to be able to forward your plot, though, don't you?
Yeah. Some people, like I believe it was Lois Bujold, said, I try to think of the worst possible thing that I could do to my character, and I do that. I'm not quite that cruel, because I can imagine far worse things than I could ever write, honestly. And sometimes I have to imagine those when I'm being, my worst villains, because they will at least be contemplating the worst possible thing they could do to you, especially if you piss them off, or if they're just the kind of villain that just thinks torment is fun, or some. Then so I won't quite go that far, but I'll at least know what the worst thing is. And I do often have to remind myself, yeah, I know he could get past it if he did X, Y, and Z. But remember, he's not the kind of character that thinks of X, Y, and Z, and he's going to make this mistake, and it's going to take him straight to hell. Yeah, he'll get out of that after a while, but it'll take him a while. And it'll be much more amusing that way than him just waltzing past this problem. And I had to do that in one of the things I've just been writing, saying, no. Yes, but he's actually going to be hurt, because this is much better this way in terms of the story, because it will make these other characters who haven't had a chance to do anything cool are going to have to take care of it and save his bacon.
All right, go ahead, James.
Have you had any characters kind of go, hey, this is where I want to go?
You mean I said, okay, you're going over here. No, I'm not. I'm going over there.
Yeah.
Few times, not as many other people. Some people write that way. Their entire life is, I don't have a plot. They'll tell me the plot because I have no idea where I'm going with this. Mine are usually not that. If I say, this is the plot, they say, for that plot, so of course I'll go there. But there have been a few surprises. The one that's been published that was most obvious was in, again, the Boundary books with Eric Flint. There was a character named Nicholas Glendale. He's basically a Carl Sagan-like character, except he's for paleontology. But, he's sort of the scientific rock star type. Everyone knows him. He's charismatic, fairly good-looking, and all that. Mm-hmm. The whole point for him, he was the mentor to one of the other characters years ago. And he's supposed to come in, save this character from a very embarrassing situation, and then show up in one other scene where, because he's so famous, he's being consulted, and he was supposed to say, you want me? You want my student over here? He refused to leave. He just wouldn't go. He insisted on staying there, even though he wasn't supposed to be on this mission at all. And then he hung out, and he even had a scene where he sort of angsted about the fact he couldn't go into space in the next book, and he stays there, and he keeps coming back. He's in all 3 books, and he was supposed to have 2 scenes. And I liked the character, but I didn't expect that. That wasn't the design. He just the other one is a character that I actually haven't published. His name is Hannibal Gunn. He's this super macho, manly Marine, space Marine kind of guy. Upright, manly, in all possible ways. And he's at one point, he's working through this one scene with him, and I sit down and he's talking with this kid, a religious, and the kid's going through a terrible crisis of faith. And all of a sudden, as I'm sort of working this out, are these very considered, deeply religious points. And suddenly, plan for him to have any religion whatsoever. He was atheistic in my head. And suddenly it's clear that not only is he not atheistic, he's absolutely rock solid Christian belief, pure and certain of it, in the kind of supportive mode. Because of his faith, he helps the other people around him keep it. It's like, I'm not religious. I never was religious. I didn't have any. Where did I get these words that are out here? I don't know where Gunn got them. I still do, to this day, do not know where he got all that stuff. But that was a surprise.
All right, I got a question for you. So you go to sleep, and something wakes you up in the middle of the night. And what that something is one of your characters, the one that you personally have the most psychological angst with. Who would that be, and in what story?
You mean the one that personally bothers me about what I've done to them the most?
Yes.
You mean the character basically wakes me up and says, why did you do this shit to me? Oh, man. I'm not sure which one it would be. Probably it would be the main character in Princess Holy Aura. Stephen Russ starts out as a ordinary guy living in a sort of upper lower class circumstance. That is, he's not starving, he's not likely to be kicked out of his apartment, but he's living day to day and so on. But he thinks he's got a basically decent life and everything's going along, and suddenly he gets chosen to be Princess Holy Aura. wait a minute, princess, hold, whoa, slow up. And when circumstances make it so that he says, yes, okay, I accept this burden because, well, as we mentioned before, sacrifice, that's one of the major themes and so on.
Right.
The stuff that I put him through over and over through it, because she eventually has to develop an understanding of who she is, where she came from, where she's going to go, and whether she will even be the same person she was when it's all over. And she has to watch other people who are much younger than children, basically, young teenagers, being put in situations they should never be put into, up against monstrous creatures that even adults can, break seeing these things. But they have to fight them. Steve/Holly/Holy Orr is a part of this, but one with an adult perspective and a feeling of vast responsibility for what's happening to these people. And as with all of my characters, ultimately this will work out.
Right.
I can easily see him saying, "What the hell? What's wrong with you? How could you do this to me?" And my reaction being, "You were coming to talk to me. I might have been a lot nicer about it, but generally, we authors, we don't expect you guys to be able to cross over. We're safe here. You don't bother us. Otherwise, we'd never do any of that shit." No author wants to meet their characters personally. We get killed.
But I have had creatives on that have had characters stay with them for as long as, okay, so they get them into this one setting and they take care of their world and they're doing all of this stuff, and then they decide to go and work on something else, and it's a totally different world, but that character keeps going, hey, I'm over here. I want to do this. I'm part of this. You don't know that, but I am. Would you go and like say if one of your editor friends, editor friends too, say if one of your creative friends came to you and said, I have this character, and I mean you've got you have a psychological background, so he's trying, and he knows this, your friend knows this, and so he comes to you and says, I've got this character I've created, and I put them in this particular world, and I'm working on this new piece, and I've gotten maybe midway into it, and this character comes back, and he won't let me alone, he won't let me sleep, he won't let me go anywhere else other than to write some stuff down about what he has or she has to say, so that maybe I can get to the next part of this book that I'm trying to write, which wasn't even supposed to have that person in it to begin with.
I have not quite had that happen to me, but very close. And the advice that what I did, and I'll tell you the advice that I give them is the same. The situation was writing my book Polychrome. Was initially inspired by, I'm an Oz fan. I've been a fan of the Oz books since I was a little kid. Chrome is a character in those books. She's the daughter of the rainbow. Mm-hmm. So I saw this awesome rainbow that for a moment looked like it came down in the parking lot of a nearby mini mall. And I had this image of Polychrome dancing down the rainbow and getting stuck there. It was a really cool image, and that was like, well, it sat there for a little bit, and then suddenly the entire plot of this entire book, it told me why Polychrome was there, what she was looking for, why she had to come to this, to here for that, what she was going to do, the good guys, the bad guys, everything was all right there in my head. I said, well, that's cool, but that's not what I have contracts for, so I have to finish these 2 books over here. And the novel came and leaned against me and said, yeah, there's some nice deadlines you got there. Something were to happen to them. And it turned out that what I had to do in order to keep done least one chapter of Polychrome every week, or I found I couldn't write anything else. So my advice to anyone in that position would be, write it out of your system. Even if in the end you say, this character doesn't belong in this book, and they never did, them in it. And then maybe you can write the part with them not in it. Or possibly you'll say, maybe they do belong there. Or you might say, well, I don't really need you. Yeah, I can see where this works. But if you don't get it out of your system, it'll just keep nagging you.
Right.
And in that particular case, it wasn't just nagging, it was, I'm shutting off your creative faculties.
Right.
Anything else until you've done this. Scary
Right.
in a way.
All right, so creative people very often have lots of different voices or scenarios going on in their head. And a lot of times they travel the area between sanity and madness because of it. Some of the people that have come onto this show have said, I just needed to get something. I needed to write this stuff down so that I could get them to shut up. Anybody?
So you're saying that kind of thing doesn't quite of me. I mean, because basically, here's some stories that I really wish I could read because they can't see inside of my head. So right. I'm creating them. Now, to an extent, there are some outside influences. You know, if like Baen Books and Eric Flint said, well, here's this concept that Eric has. Can you write in this world? And I scratched my head and said, yeah, actually I could. That looks kind of neat. But I couldn't have done it if I didn't think to myself, a cool book to read. So when I'm writing, a lot of it is purely, this is fun. This is what I would like to read. And that's where I get the danger of making it too easy, because when I'm reading a book, I'm often saying, no, don't have that happen. Don't do that stupid thing. And they do that stupid thing. I'm like, no. And so when I'm writing, I have the feeling that maybe I can make it easier. No, don't do that. Harder. To a certain extent, there's some things I will never do to a character. But anyway, so I'm not generally doing it to get stuff out of my head or dealing with issues I may have. Always crazy, always angry. I'm always crazy, so I don't need to get rid of it, because insanity, while sanity is a mindless state.
Yes, absolutely. I think so. All right, so James, do you have any questions right now?
No, I'm enjoying it. No, I'm just kind of.
No, you like what you
put him on the spot. He's chilling. He's chilling for real.
Yeah.
Kind of like in a crib. He's chilling. All right, so nuances of characters. When you actually get one that you know that you want to work with, how do you go about giving them their spirit or their personality?
That's actually the hardest thing for me to do. And I didn't really learn how to do that very well myself. I learned that by working in fan fiction, actually, with my wife. Well, at the time, girlfriend, but now wife, Kathleen. I was working on fan fiction for a nowadays very little-known anime called Saint Seiya. And we would both role play and then write up the sessions. And a lot of the issues when we were writing it up, modifying things, she said, no, that's wrong for the character. They don't do that. Yes, I know it makes sense to you, but it wouldn't make sense to this character, so don't do that. So after doing this for some years, I started to understand how characters were affected by their choices and how their choices would be different from each other. So building it's hard to say how I do it. I start with a rough sketch of purpose is. Why are they in this book? Why do I need this character, not that one, that one, that one? So when I was writing the Jason Wood stories, that was fairly simple because I was going to be writing them for first person. So it was his purpose is I see everything, get the story. And since they were stories that were based around the concepts like Kolchak, the Night Stalker, and things, and Buffy and so on, the idea was there would be some supernatural mystery that has to be unraveled. So he has to have some sort of a detective shtick. And since I was interested at the time and ended up going into the information sciences, I said, I'm going to make him an information scientist because that goes along with what I'm working on, and therefore I don't have to go and spend time in the mindset of somebody who's not even thinking about the stuff that I have to anyway.
Right.
So I got that outline. But then I said, well, with that, I could just make him me, but I don't want him just make him me. So I had to change some things about it and said, well, what will I change about him? And that slowly by doing this, well, maybe I'll change this. I'll change that. Modify these things. And so it's an incremental process where I start building him up and I just start trying things, sometimes almost like making a mental doll. It's like, I'll try this on you. It doesn't work. How about that? No, not that. Oh, that'll work. So Jason picked up, he does have an appreciation, for example, for alcoholic beverages. He will drink and so on occasion. I won't do that at all. I can't. I can't stand the taste of anything alcoholic. He and I share a love of cooking. He's fairly athletic, although not obsessively so. He's much more personable with people in a uncontrolled situation. That is, here it's sort of controlled. You've told me to come in here. You tell me what to talk about. I'm talking about stuff that is relative to me. So that's fairly easy. But if I just ran into you, say at quote a party, I'd be just I'd be the kind of guy who shrinks up against the wall and sits there. Jason isn't. He'll wander around and he'll talk to people and all that, and he's pretty cool with it. That was one of the things I felt I had to make him like, because you can't be an entrepreneur and go meeting people all the time if you can't at least fake it well enough to seem comfortable and personable with people in any setting. So another character like Mark Duquesne, what I did there was I ripped him wholesale out this is in the Arenaverse. I ripped him wholesale out of Doc Smith's Skylark books, where there is a Mark C. Duquesne, and my character is strongly based off of him. But then I changed him to say he's a real person. He's not just this literary figure. And he was made to be this literary figure, and then he discovered his whole life was a lie. What does that do to a guy? And then I just started working through what he did to recover from the shock of finding out that his whole world was fake and that the real world outside was nothing like anything he'd ever thought of before. He had some issues. It took him a while to get through those. So it's partly dependent on what kind of thing I'm writing. The more realistic the setting is, there's a lot of things that are excluded. You don't have magic in there, then you don't have somebody who's afraid in a realistic sense of magic or ghosts. While in a magical world, somebody being afraid of ghosts might be perfectly sane and normal and darn well should be afraid of ghosts too. But
Right.
in our world, in general, that would be considered kind of odd, because most of the time there's no proof they exist, and if there is, they sure ain't coming and visiting all of us. I mean, I've gone to all sorts of haunted places and nothing's ever bothered me.
One of these days while we're off air, I'll tell you what my background is, and then we'll have a little conversation about that. All right, but right now, this is all about you, and it is 8:55, believe it or not. So I would
Time
like
sure is fun when you're having flies, as my one toad says to the other.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. All right, so it is now time for you to give a link or shout out to those who have helped you, and what your link is for your latest work.
Well, those who've helped me, including you, because you're getting me on your show. Obviously, Baen Books and all the wonderful people there, because if it wasn't for them, most of my books wouldn't be out there. My wife, Kathleen, who if she wasn't there, I wouldn't have any time to write anyway. others. For Princess Holy Aura, I have to give a salute to someone who is no longer with us. His name is Stephen Reed. I was the person I based Stephen Russ on, and he was my best older friend when I was younger. He was basically a mentor to me. I wish he was alive to read the book. I think he'd like it. As far as links, go to www.grandcentralarena.com. That's my website. And from there, you can pretty much find anything else you want to know about me, including just emailing me and saying, hey, you said X. I'd like to know more about that.
Very cool. All right, James, do you want to give a final?
Hey, how you doing? Goodbye. Thanks.
Hey, bye. Nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you too, and thank you for coming on the show with us.
My pleasure. Perhaps we'll meet again.
James, what do you think about his style of writing?
It's the first I've heard that way,
Do you think as an actor that some of the stuff that he has said would be also applicable to what you do?
Oh yeah, definitely. I know we talk about method actors and all that, but
Yes.
method writing, it's just amazing watching the writers talk about how they do it, how they come. Hey, no, you can't do that. You gotta go there.
Let's go the other way.
Yeah.
I know. Let's plan our escape right now. All right. So you're going to be a regular on this show. I don't know how often that regularness will be, but what do you think about the process of doing this and how it can help your audience expand?
Well, hey, the more people who see this and listen to me, hopefully more of them will be interested enough to go see the stuff or look for my name, online. By the way, spelled RYK for the first name, SPOOR for the last.
I think I probably spelled it wrong in my haste of trying to figure out what the hell I'm doing. Yeah, I told you it's my first time, my first rodeo, and when I mess up.
And I hope that you will have fewer people mess with your schedule in future things so that you're not running all over the place. But I enjoy being on, and I would be glad to come on whenever it's convenient to you.
We've had shows where I've had to
talk
literally put it together at the last minute. But yeah, we always like to have you on and appreciate you being on the show. You go have fun and enjoy yourself with your guests at home. And I will talk to you soon. Please go ahead and go up to the red phone.
The red phone. Okay, bye-bye.
See you later. Thank you.
Hour 1 down, 4 to go.
All right, so I'm going to go over to a brand new guest and have him go ahead and hit the link. Right now. All right, let's see if this thing
works like it's supposed to.
Comes up and does what it's supposed to do.
Writers are interesting characters because they're pretty much the whole movie making process into like one person.
Cool. There he is.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing. How are you doing?
All right. Let me get the headphones on here.
I can hear you and I can see you. That's awesome. I can see you good too. All right, so we're gonna get right to it. You are on Zombiepalooza Radio Live. This is your first time being on, Joe Schilling, and I'm going to introduce you to my guest co-host today. His name is James Barker, and so James, this is
good evening, Joe.
James.
How you doing, James?
Doing good.
All right, so cool. All right, so what I would like you to do, Joe, is tell people who you are, what you create, and give us an idea why we should pay attention to where you're going.
Okay, my name is Joe, and basically I do primitive blacksmithing, also known as neo-tribal metalsmithing. I like to forge knives and tools the old-fashioned way out of like charcoal, campfires, etc. One of my basically talents and parlor tricks is to get a campfire going, run a length of pipe into it, hook up a Coke bottle to a pair of garbage bags, and put a piece of steel in, start hammering it out a knife. People ask me, wonder how hot can I get the fire with a pair of trash bag? I actually got it hot enough to actually melt a 1/4 inch of leaf spring.
Leaf spring? That's like
1/4 inch thick, yeah.
All right, so a garbage bag. When you talked to me earlier, and you said you do things with garbage bags to be able to help make knives and all that. My brain, because I don't know anything about that. I know a little bit about blacksmithing, but I don't know anything about what you do. Talk to me about some of the different kinds of regular household tools or other things that you would use to be able to put something like that together in, say, maybe a survival situation.
Oh, that is exceedingly simple. I mean, if in a survival situation, anyone could find a length of pipe and cut it easily anywhere. You can even, salvage it as like out of a burnt out building, like one of those 1/4 inch pipes for water.
Right.
That's easily. You could easily get a wrench, take that off. Doesn't matter how long it is, as long as it's like you keep it away from the, your bellows away from the fire. And if it is like short enough, you could create like a dirt berm in front of it to shield the sparks and the heat away from your bellows.
All right. So now in my ignorance, I'm asking, do you use the garbage bags as billows?
Yes, contractor grade trash bags. You just basically what you do is you cut off the one end. You stick a Coke bottle through, like one of those like 18 ounce or whatever it is, like you buy at the gas station.
Yeah.
You cut the bottom off the Coke bottle. You push that through, and then you put duct tape or just like cord, just cinch it tight to keep the air like a seal, so to speak.
Okay.
You put that onto like a 1/4 inch pipe. The regular Coke bottles fit perfectly on there. Pepsi, water bottles, whatever. They all have the same hole diameter.
Okay.
You cook that. You put that onto a length of pipe, and you can just blow that into your campfire. Forge hooks to hang your baling pots.
Right.
You can make a chisel if you need to cut wood. You can even forge you can find railroad spikes exceedingly easy anywhere. You could even find them off the side of the railroad tracks. You could make a cheap, somewhat effective hatchet or even a knife out of it, but it's not the best steel for that. But for short term, for starting out, for like getting started, that is a very good way to have.
Let me ask you this. I know that you started to do some videos. Do you have videos about any of this process that people can see?
Unfortunately, not at this time. Not at this time. I've been meaning to do so, but my work schedule has been so crazy that I come home just exhausted, not being able to do that. And weekends, I sometimes have to help the in-laws and wife.
Right. So, I bring on lots of different creatives in all different areas, and many of them have a very busy life and/or very large responsibilities. And in the downtime, which they don't have very much of, often they go and they do this whatever this creative process is. How did you get involved in kind of like deciding that this is what you wanted to do and find out that you were good at doing it?
Well, it started about 15 years ago. I first, basically, at the late Ron Hood came out with the video of neo-tribal metalsmithing, and I showed basically how to make your own forge out of a wash tub and cement, and basically make a forge out of it, and how to hammer out knives the old-fashioned way. I was fortunate to be go with him on a survival trek up in Idaho on his survival camping video, volume 10. If you go to www.survival.com, look up the videos, volume 10, I'll be in that video. But that's where I got the idea of how to use the trash bags, because you see us using trash bags to forge out like chisels and spear points out of like a horseshoe, a nail, as a drill bit for a pump drill.
Let me think here. What do I want to do? At what age do you think would be good to start learning how to do these basic survival skills?
If they're basically responsible, they've shown good responsibility, anyone at any age could start it as long as they could swing a hammer. It doesn't matter how heavy. You could even swing a 2-pound engineer's hammer with the beveled edge at one end.
Okay. All right. So
I taught a 7-year-old girl to make a small knife.
Yeah, and we need more people to do that kind of stuff. Our girls, I know my girls. I know at least 2 of them that would probably love to learn how to do something like that. Their dad is kind of a survival guy and all of that kind of thing. So that would be something cool for them to see. Watching a video and being able to be encouraged sometimes by other people, because kids don't always necessarily think that their parents know how to do stuff, but if they see somebody else do it, hey, that's cool. But it is also a way to be able to interact with your young people that doesn't have, going on with games and
that drives me nuts.
Right, because that's certainly not how it was for us. I know when we were growing up, we didn't have all that.
Oh yeah.
Right. All right. So, to your knowledge right now, what is the most interesting thing that you have handcrafted?
Actually, recently I've been looking at the old world wave style of knives, like the sax, the finished puku. And recently I made a puku knife the traditional way. Hammered it out, got the rat tail, and what I did, the only thing that was not traditional was the butt end. Basically, is I use layered birch bark, and it blows people's minds away. Is they think it's leather spacing, but it's actually birch bark. And what I do is I cut out the birch barks about like an inch and a half square, and I slide them onto the rat tail until it gets to the very end. And at the end, I put like sagebrush wood at the end, and then just used a sander and just basically just got it to the correct form. In fact, I have to use that as a everyday carry knife right now. I'm not sure how well you can see it.
Oh yeah.
But this is what I use. And it's like under 7 inches. The blade length could be legally carried in most of the states because it's under 3 inches. So as you can see, and here's the sagebrush butt right here. And I did use like a leather spacing here and at the choil.
That's real cool. So the metal of it, what was that originally?
This was a piece of leaf spring.
Cool. All right.
Basically 4.5 inches. So.
All right. All right. For those who may not know exactly what leaf spring is, can you tell them what it's normally used for?
Yes, actually, they're used on our vehicles, our trucks, our cars. If you look underneath, you'll see like a bow like this with a couple other metal plates stacked on top. That's leaf spring. Mm-hmm. And that's basically used as shocks to help your car when you're going over those potholes, which they never seem to repair.
In Warren we know a lot about potholes. It's basically a little Armageddon in Warren in some of these areas. All right, so
Try Tennessee.
fun. Let's see, where else do I want to go? All right, you've gotten yourself involved in a couple of different projects, and people are paying very, very close attention to you. Now, some of the stuff you may not be able to talk about, and like I said, I don't want you to do that, but the kinds of things that maybe perhaps drew their attention to you, can you talk about that?
My sparkling personality? No, basically is my knowledge my knowledge of my bushcraft skills is I'm one of the people that inspires people. Is like, it's, you know, you have some of these people, for the lack of term, I call them trust fund babies. You know, they could go to these schools, take all these classes, and then go out into the wilderness and play and pretend. I didn't have that opportunity to do that. I was working a full-time job. So every night after work, I scheduled a time. I was basically, it was like not going to sit down and watch TV or play on a computer or anything like that. Is I would schedule a time to myself, whether it be 20 minutes, half an hour, even 10 minutes. Just practice the skills. Just go through the motion, whether it be bow drill, flint napping. I mean, basically anything that is like, you know, we all have a choice of what our downtime is.
Right.
And because of that is just those little bits of time that I spent actually increased my skill level to where basically I have bigwigs who look at me with respect.
Right. So about how long have you been, and I know James has a question, but I'm going to shove this in real quick. About how long have you been practicing your skills?
Well, I took my first wilderness survival class from the tracker school, the Tom Brown Jr. Tracker School, in 1992, 25 years ago. Of course, I didn't start getting into that until I was 14 years old, when I discovered the book My Side of the Mountain, which basically completely shot-putted me onto that field, where I just basically wanted to know how to live out in the mountains like that.
All right, we're going to go over to my special co-host, James Barker, for his first question.
How did you get started doing this?
Okay, that's a good question. That's a very good question. Is I grew up when ADD, ADHD was just coming out of the closet. It was still to the kin of being retarded. I'm sorry if anyone's offended of that political incorrect statement, but that's a fact. That's a true statement. So I basically took to the woods to get away from being harassed, because my fellow students also lived in the same neighborhood and they didn't go into the woods. So that was the reason why I went in there. It also started that I also hid in the library and read. I discovered the book My Side of the Mountain, Hatchet, and others of that ilk. And that basically got me so motivated to be out there, so where I would spend entire weekends and they would just look at me like I was insane, which was great.
Okay, you would say that it gave you a sense of belonging?
Yes, it did. It gave me a sense of belonging. It gave me purpose. It made me feel like I wasn't such a freak. Well, actually, yeah, I was a freak, but it was more so I was normal out there.
Absolutely. Go ahead, James.
Okay, so take us through the process of, say, making a knife from like start to finish.
All righty. First is you could get the piece, whether you cut it with a hacksaw, Dremel tool, or edge grinder. You could, I love the edge grinder because you can cut the leaf spring right down the middle and make it perfectly square. What you do then is you get the fire to where it's basically really radiating that like hot orange yellow color. You put your steel in there and you wait until it's like a nice orange color. What you want to do is get a broken speaker magnet, touch it. If it is attracted to the magnet, it's still not hot enough. you want it to be non-magnetic. So where it basically is when you touch the glowing steel to the magnet, and it does not attract to the magnet, you're at that proper forging temperature. From there, I like to basically start out with getting the tip, getting the bevel out. You know, sort of like what I'm working on, like right now, is I'll start hammering this out. Once that is started, I'll start thinning it out to it's like almost the right width. Then I would start working on a handle and start hammering out for the handhold right there, and then would draw it out, even it out, and everything until I basically get the right form. Once you get the form that you need, you want to counterbend it, because if you start hammering like for the edge right here, it's going to start doing this. So what you want to do is counterbend it to it almost looks like a kukuri. And when you start hammering out the edge, it's sort of like working clay. And it's going to start going like this, right back straight. It's going to, when you start hammering, it's going to go like so.
Okay. Once
that is done, once you get the forged shape out, you have the nice edge and everything, you want to anneal it. Annealing is basically getting it right to the critical temperature again, in it more until it's almost ready to be overheated. What you do then is, I like to do is get some wood ash, cover it up, and let it sit for about overnight. Sometimes it takes 2 days. The longer it cools, the softer it'll be. When it does soften, it's called annealing. And when it's completely annealed, that's when you can take, do all your shaping with your file. Or if you have a sander, just basically use your sander to just get the nice edge or to the nice bevel. And then take the file, get your edge. Once that is done, you take it back to your forge, you heat it back up to the non-magnetic, and you can just hammer in your maker's mark if you want. Don't have to. And once that is done, you then take a tub of vegetable oil. It could be any type of oil, really, peanut oil, corn oil, sunflower seed oil, even transmission fluid. And you want to have the blade facing magnetic north. The reason why it drives me nuts, if I'm even off by an inch, you'll actually see the blade actually have a curve like this. It'll start to warp. So if you have it magnetic north and you quench it, then it's like quenches true. It is now completely hardened. It is also at the most brittle state. A lot of people think, oh, now I could use it. No, if you do, it's going to shatter. You then put it in your oven about 350, 375 until it's about a nice bronze color. Of course, the longer it's in there, it's going to get a darker color. I've had one in there, I forgot, and it was like a dark purple.
Oh.
But it didn't affect the temperature at all.
Interesting.
Yeah, I do need to make a video of that. So
yeah, that way, we also try to do what we can to make sure that we don't ruin anything that somebody else would probably take offense to. A lot of times we get our creatives, and sometimes they go into the kitchen and they kind of borrow.
Yes, get your wife's permission first.
When they're right, but when or whoever is there. But sometimes when people are really, really excited about trying something new, they will not really think through the right process and go and get something, and maybe it ends up destroyed, and then they get into trouble because they're experimenting.
Yes.
Right. So, all right. Yeah. Been there, done that myself, and so is my husband. And we don't want to stifle the creative process. If you get a way to be able to do it and be able to be successful at keeping on doing it, then we want you to do that. All right, so James, you have another question for him.
So how long would it take to do that? Time-wise?
It depends on the size of the knife. For example, like the knife I showed earlier, the little puku knife, I hammered that out in about an hour and a half. And basically is you can and with that type of size knife, you can even just take it to the sander, and you could get the edge in. It takes a little bit longer because it's not completely annealed, but it can be done. You can take these kind of shortcuts. I like to anneal them because that way it softens it and reduces the amount of stress fractures that can form in there.
When you were first starting to do this, how many of these knives actually shattered before you figured out how far to take it before it does that?
2.
That's relative. That's relative.
I mean, no, it's like I'm a quick. It's like is the first time is like I did that. I was like doing the rod test, like the mild steel piece of brass rod. I was like,
right.
Cool, this is a nice knife. Took it, kind of battened it on the rod, and the half of the knife broke off. And I was like, oops, I think I forgot to temper it.
So I mean,
second time I was kind of playing with it. I was like, oh, this is nice. So juggling around, twirling my fingers, and I dropped it, and it hit the ground point first, and the whole point just shattered. Yeah, all about it was a nice long crack right along the ridge line.
There is this one show that I see on the cable every once in a while. It's called
Forged in Fire.
Yeah. Do you ever watch any of that, or is there anything?
Oh yeah.
Is there anything
yes.
in watching that show that you've learned to be able to help your own technique?
Absolutely. It's like watching it. Some of the things. Some of the steel that they give them, I just shake my head thinking that's setting them up for failure right there. It's like some of the things I'm like, I have no idea what, like structural steel. It's like, oh yeah, that ain't gonna work. I mean, it's good for tools, maybe chisels, but it like no matter how much you quench it, it never gets hard enough, and the blade will like fold or chip on you.
And if you're in a survival situation, the one thing that you really want to make sure of is that first you have a very good understanding of the tool you're going to be using, and you might not necessarily know how it's made, but you also have to have an understanding of why you're carrying it to begin with, and what it's going to be able to do and what it probably won't do. And the only way to be able to do that is do some of this stress testing on it. Have you ever stress test any knives or products from anyone, or have people ever stress tested your knives that you've created for them?
Yes, actually, yes. I had a friend of mine whose one does was online comics of the Wandering Ones. I made him a tracker style knife, and he chopped a 5-inch sapling that was dead down, and it was like still sharp as a razor, no structural damage whatsoever. I've had people like dig with it. I've made what's called a hori hori, or Japanese digging knife.
Okay.
And they took it up into the Sierra Mountains. If you know anything about the Sierras, the soil is very rocky and very hard. And they said it was just plowing right into the soil like it was like sand.
That's a quality knife there. All right.
It is.
For some people who may not know anything about Tom Brown Tracker School, and I think this is the first time that school has ever been mentioned on this show, but I know that it is very important to my husband and to other people who do the kind of work that you do and in survival situations. Talk a little bit about what that experience was and what kind of benefits that you derived from it actually being a part of that process.
Oh boy. I basically went there because I basically, for the most part, I gave up on society. I was done. I was completely done. I was alone. I got tired of it. I was going to go there and learn these skills and run away to the wilderness. Well, as you can see, I'm still here.
I got a clue for you. That back there in that room that you're in.
But anyways, is I went there, and at that time, as he was imploring us to teach, to pass on these skills. And I realized now, like, okay, I'll give that a try. So I went to the parks and recs and asked them if I could teach there. Next thing you know, they said, sure. I didn't expect that. And next thing you know, I'm teaching these classes about fire making, hide tanning, pressure flaking, and everything like that. And basically people were like, just like clamoring, what am I going to teach again? It's like, it just almost got overwhelming.
All right, I know some about it because, like I said, my husband went there and spent some time up there doing particular interesting, I would call it a lifestyle. A lot of people that go up there
It is
for learning how to track humans and or track animals and things like that, and it's a very important source for learning how to do that. But going there too and learning just primitive skills so that if something really shitty happens, and we end up getting either knocked back to the Stone Age, so to speak, or we end up in maybe a situation like a hurricane that smacked the hell out of Texas and Florida and, of course, Puerto Rico. These people are really, in some situations, even in the middle of the United States with Texas and Florida, not that's middle, but up where we are, they are still in a way where they're without electricity and without running water and without a lot of the other regular services that
you'd be surprised how uncomfortable that really is. One of the places we lived in, we actually had no power for about a couple of days, and you don't realize exactly how addicted you are to artificial stimuli until like the power goes out.
Right.
It's like, it's so easy. Go onto the computer and see what the weather is. Turn on the TV for the news, your phone or whatnot. None of that works. It is exceedingly uncomfortable. And there's this little factor that happens that when that happens is you get a major case of the boards. I am so bored. So you'd be surprised as you think, oh, I'll finish all the UFOs, the unfinished objects. The little crafts that you had set up to the side to finish. You'd be surprised how much you get done in one day and realize I have nothing left to do. I am so bored. So that is one of the things I teach is like, practice your skills. I went outside and started working on my bow drill. I've learned for a friend of mine how to use a couple lengths of 2x2s to make a teepee out of a 10x20 tarp, which I even used, and it survived high winds and rain. You could even have, like, if you dig a little pit in there, you could have a small fire in there, and it does not take a big fire to warm up your little shelter.
Right. Okay, so talking about shelters and things of that sort, do you do, let's see, what the heck is this thing called? It's made out of leaves and sticks. And
debris hut or leaf hut.
Yeah, a debris hut or a leaf hut. We got fall coming around. Last year, our kids went into the field next door, and without any prodding or anything like that, they went and they collected a bunch of sticks because we have a bunch of trees on the property, and they gathered up all the leaves off the big maple tree that we have up in the front, and they made a debris hut, and we took pictures and all of that, and it stayed up for quite some time.
It does.
Talk about
basically what the leaf hut is, you want it snug. Think coffin.
Yeah,
think like think a sleeping bag. Is you want it basically is as wide, the walls as wide as your arms reach, and as high as your crotch. I'm not going to grab my crotch, so yeah.
Right here.
But yeah, you want like that. Yes. Now, like a lot of people think that, you take a pile of leaves and you cover it, it's good. Nope. You want it at least 3 feet thick. Thicker, the better. The more it's going to keep you warm.
Right.
Even better if you can't stuff the inside with leaves and sleep on top of that, because you're not going to warm up the earth. You sleep on top of the earth, you're doing conduction of heat. Your body heat is going to go to where the coldest is, which is the ground.
Right.
So that's why we have, when we go camping, we have sleeping pads.
Right.
Is to prevent that.
So
the more you have, the more you can, be warm.
how thick should the bottom be before you start to build, or should you build it with the sticks first and then?
Sticks first and then the leaves.
And how thick inside should the leaves be?
As thick as you can, that as long as you can fit in there.
Okay. And then about 3 foot high on top.
3 feet, 3 feet, yes, on the sides and on the top, minimum.
Very interesting.
The more you have, the more you're going to be warm.
Right. Okay, so we talked about knives. We talked about debris huts. Fire making.
But yeah, on the shelter top here is, I also made what's called a stacked wall. Debris hut is basically made a circle out of, and just basically had 2 poles like this apart, like about 2 feet apart, and woven with branches on the sides, and stuffed that full of leaves. And then you get logs on top of the walls, and you have like basically a hut where you can have a nice sized fire and sleep multiple people in there.
All right, so we talk a lot about getting first the structure, but I know in a survival situation, there are between 3 and 4 golden rules that you need to have if you're found by yourself and you need to spend the night or spend a number of days there. One of them is to make sure that you can make a fire. Now, one way to make a fire is to use something called a bow drill. But if you don't know how to do that, are there any other ways to be able to strike that spark? And once you get that spark going, before you get the spark going, what kind of kindling should you have to get that spark going so that you can actually get a fire started?
The most important thing about fire making is fire preparation. You want to start out with the thin stuff, like kindling, as you call it, and then you have the tinder wood, which is a little bit thicker, like pencil thick, and then you have the bulk wood, which is about wrist thick on thicker. And you need to get that organized to basically, because if you don't have that organized, you're gonna be scrambling around, and that tinder bundle, that little fire you just made, is gonna die, and you're gonna get cold.
Right.
But yeah, for people who don't have skills with bow drills, hand drills, like the primitive fire making,
right,
is you can get flint and steel kits online. I do make them. I do make 2 types. One is like, they're both of them are like a hammer strikers. Because if anyone has seen flint and steel, when you go like this, you're gonna bark your knuckles up, and a lot of people do that. And I got fed up with that, so I made something called what I call a T striker or hammer striker, where basically is it comes out away from your fingers to like maybe like 1.5 inches, but that 1.5 inches is keeping your hands away from the rock, which helps keep you from bleeding and getting an infection.
Right. All right. So since you touched on infections and things of that sort, you can, when you come from a place where you've got like your lights and camera and all that kind of stuff, and you're all happy and all that, you don't think about, hey, I might need to start a fire in the next 10, 20 minutes. I don't know. Or you find that you're driving and everything is wonderful and you're going through the woods and life is great, and then your car dies.
And it does happen a lot. We've had, there's been a news recently, a couple was lost a couple of days out in the Utah wilderness because their GPS malfunctioned.
Right. And that's another subject we can touch on, but I'm not going to do that tonight. At least I don't think so. All right. So when you are in a situation and you don't know what you're doing and you can't help yourself, the likelihood that you're going to survive is not necessarily zero, but you cut your chances of survival, I would say, dramatically by not understanding how to do some of these most basic skills that in younger, or I should say older generations, they taught their kids. It was taught in school how to do all of this stuff so that everybody knew in case something happened.
And you brought that up perfectly. Is exactly what that type of thing is the two defining factors that basically foobar you up completely is panic.
Yes.
And basically, as I call with the handy rules, the rules of 3 in a way is you have 3 seconds without thinking, and 3 minutes without air. It basically is if you control your thinking and control your breathing, you will keep panic at bay. Because one thing, if you start panicking, you start going like that.
Yeah.
And then what that happens is you basically lower the oxygen contact in your brain. Your brain starts going, oh shit, flood the body with adrenaline. And then when adrenaline goes up, you basically start not thinking rationally. So you need to basically start doing, just do that. And just basically whatever, do a meditation mantra, prayer, sing, the alphabet, that type of thing, whatever, something like that to calm yourself down and say, okay, I'm stuck.
Right.
I know, I'm scared. Okay, I am scared. But I can't run through the woods because I can't see. It's like, I am going to trip. I'm going to hurt myself, So what are my priorities? It's going to get cold. Okay. My car is a good shelter. I need to, and hopefully I wish a lot of people did carry like extra clothes and extra blankets in their car.
They don't.
They don't.
You know those people that got trapped on in Atlanta when they had that major snowstorm. I don't know if you remember that, but that was a number of years back.
Yep.
And it like rarely snows there. Their whole highway system was basically shut down. These people were stuck there for days.
Yeah. We had a case like that is in Nevada, a elderly couple, again, their GPS malfunctioned, and they went on these roads in like the remote areas of Nevada, and their car got stuck in snow. The husband violated number 1 rule. He left the car after a couple of days and went for help. They found the woman 4 weeks later alive, but she was staying with the car. She was malnourished and dehydrated and frostbit, but she was alive. They never found her husband.
Right. I would say the most important thing to do, if in fact you are not well adept at survival mode, wilderness style survival mode, I should say, is stay with the vehicle or stay with the people that you came with. And
it does not take a lot of space up in your vehicle. Is get an 8x10 tarp or larger, good heavy quality. It's not that expensive. Go online and like Sportsman's Guide, look up disaster blankets. You could get like a bundle, like 5 of them for like $25.
Mm-hmm.
And have that in your car. And that way, if you get stuck or even at home, you can cocoon yourself in those blankets in that tarp, and you'll be fine. As long as the tarp will keep the rain and snow off. The blankets will keep you insulated and keep you warm.
Right. Could you actually use the tarp to go over the car?
Yeah, I mean they have large tarps like 20 by 16, and that could go over a small car.
Right. All right, so
or you could just stretch it out and make sort of like a lean-to shelter,
right
off to the side and have a little fire, coming in. Just make sure it's away from the gas tank.
Yeah. Some people though don't know to not.
I have to point that out. Common sense. Yeah.
You know, and we get people on fire from smoking at a gas station while they're pumping gas, and they're going, "Oh, I didn't know," and all of a sudden their arm is on fire or whatever. Please, in everything that you hear on this show, use common sense. Although it doesn't seem to be very freely given, some reason I don't know. I don't understand.
That's why it's geared to basically I am dumbing it down because you get some people who watch who are like, oh yeah, okay.
Right, but I know a lot of the people that listen to this show do really have a sense of how to take care of themselves, and they want to learn new techniques and things that they can use to be able to help boost their knowledge base. So, all right, so we've talked about fire making. Do you do anything about foraging at all?
Like for plants and animals?
Yeah.
Yes. My edible plants is basically rudimentarily basic, but you'd be surprised what you could find in your own yard. Is like a lot of those weeds that they advertise, kill those dandelions.
You can eat them.
Why? They're high in vitamin C, vitamin K. You could even roast the roots of dandelions for coffee.
I didn't know that.
You take, chicory as well. It's a common weed. You take the flowers, you dip them in batter, fry them up as fritters. Oh man, they are excellent.
Yummy. All right, and there's
a plant.
Yeah, there's a lot of plants in the back that are like lettuce too, and
plantain. It's this dark green with these stalks coming up. That could be used to draw out infections and alleviate bug bites and bee stings. It's called plantain.
I didn't know that about that, but I know that we have it around in the backyard. One of the things I'm trying to think of what the heck the name of it is. It is found in moist areas. I can't believe I just said that because wetlands, and it's tall and it's got like a little brown kind of stalk thing on it.
Cattails.
Thank you very much. Yes. Yeah, that's supposed to be like the grocery store of
supermarket of the wilderness. Yes.
Yeah. Talk about that.
Well, let's see, cattail you can find pretty much everywhere, but you got to be careful harvesting that plant. Mostly, it's a filter plant. Translation is if you have a factory nearby, it is absorbing those chemicals and heavy metals. You do not want to ingest that. But if you find it out like a nice swamp, the roots are starchy. You can make flour from both the starch and the pollen cones on the cattails. In the springtime, when you see that yellow on them, you can actually use that to supplement your flour, like if you're going to make bread or whatnot. Mm-hmm. And there's an interesting little thing about that is it helps allergies. By ingesting that cattail powder, the flour in your bread, it actually helps your body not fight, go crazy when it comes to allergies.
I knew about like using like bee pollen that is made in your area, and that's supposed to help you to not have as severe of an allergy. I also learned a little bit about the cattail on the root, that it is it's very thick, but that excuse me, and the outer edges of it are really tough, and you really don't want to eat that.
You peel it off.
Peel off at least 3 or 4 layers, and then you get to that real supple green, and you should just be able to chew it. Like it looks.
Oh yeah, eat it. It's very starchy. It's like eating a potato.
It's like a potato. I looked at when I saw what they were doing. It looked very, very green. It reminded me of an onion, so it doesn't have the onion flavor. It's got like a potato-ish.
It's like a water chestnut flavor.
Okay. All right.
What you do is you could basically cut the root off until you get to upper part where it's like very soft and fleshy.
Right.
And you cut that part, steam it, and serve it up like bamboo shoots.
Yummy. You know, and what do you think people used to eat back before we had all of this fruits and vegetables and all the other stuff that was sent in? They had to eat something, right?
Oh yeah.
Right. All right. So we touched on foraging. We touched on fire making. Making
survival for hunting food.
Yeah. All right. So where do you want to go next? You've got about 5 minutes to.
Okay, it's very simple. It's a lot of people when they get into a survival situation, they're like, "I'm going to go get a deer," but ignoring the majority of the other smaller, easier, accessible food sources. Squirrels. I'm going to dare say rodents, mice, voles. You know, I also going to also mention the other unmentionables, the most easiest gatherable of protein and fat. Insects.
Yes.
Grubs. Beetle grubs. I can tell you this right now is mealworms. If you want to try what it tastes like, tastes like an almond. It tastes
fried or something like that.
Oh,
or is it like
when
that?
you're still squirmy, just pop it in your mouth and go crunch. It tastes like it has an almond-like taste.
Really?
Those carpenter ants, black carpenter ants. You put them in a pan, fry them up real fast. They taste like sweet potato chips.
Carpenter ants. I hate those damn things. But you know.
Yeah, those big black ants. Yeah.
And they're pretty big too. They're called carpenter ants because they look like they could carry a shovel and a hammer and all that. All right, so and
you take your revenge on the ants now.
Yep, revenge and food at the same time.
Crickets and things of that sort too.
Yes, crickets, grasshoppers. Cook them well. Do not eat crickets or grasshoppers raw. Is because they have a tendency to carry parasites like tapeworm.
So if you're gonna,
that's why you want to roast them really good. And when they are roasted, ooh, they're good.
And
fact,
whatever they might be carrying is rendered.
Remove the legs and wings, and you're fine.
Okay. What do you say about 5-10 minutes?
About how
something like that. Who, me?
James.
Yeah, I was saying cook them about 5-10 minutes. Kind of like chicken and fish, or is it pork? No, it's fish.
Yeah, fish.
Pork. One of the poultries and something else that you got to cook real long.
Pork. It's pork. You gotta cook well. Trichinosis, what you might get. Same with bear meat.
Bear meat. Have you had bear before?
Yes, I have.
I bet that was hard to get.
Yeah, I've had groundhog. Don't advise it. You can eat it. It's just super greasy.
Yes, I have heard. And some people also eat like squirrel.
Awesome. Yep, red squirrel. That's like chewing a pine-flavored rubber band.
So I think Crunchy's a little safe. Crunchy and Dead Tour are on vacation right now. So yeah, it's probably a good thing because
I hope they're not listening either.
I'm sure.
You will hear about this one later.
Yes, I realize that. But when you're literally in a survival situation, you will eat things that you never thought that you would to be able to stay alive. Your body, although a lot of people are like, well, I'll starve myself. Whatever, I don't care. I'm not going to eat any of that.
All right.
Your body doesn't allow you to do that, though, does it?
My response to that is watch the show Alone 3 of Patagonia. 3 of them became severely malnourished. 2 were taken out of the show because they were so malnourished.
Right.
They were like basically emasculated. One guy, he was taken out. They're like going, your body BMI is way too low. It's dangerously low.
Mm-hmm.
and he's still recovering from that. It's been over a year.
Right. Your body, though, from what I hear with other people that have been in situations like that, your brain and your body say you need to stay alive, and so in that you will have the tendency to be able to look at things differently as food sources. Some people even get to the point where they eat grass, and although it's not,
You can eat grass. You can eat grass, but you can't. But it's not easily digestible.
Right.
A lot of people, what they do, they chew it and then spit out the fibers.
right.
And there's another little tidbit here about survival. When you get into starvation mode,
Mhm.
is you may be starving, but you'll start hoarding food and not wanting to touch it.
That's kind of like the guy that is in the ocean, and he's on a life raft, and there are different kinds of things that are being sent to him, and he's like, no, I'm not going to do that because
Yep.
You die.
Is basically that's the guy that got taken out. He had a surplus of dried fish, and he kept on saying, "But I have so much food. I have so much food." You could look it up, like Alone, 3 Patagonia, and
Okay.
watch that, and you'll see exactly how bad off they get.
Right. And that's usually people that have never had to be in a survival mode ever, and getting put into a situation where they really don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, even if
yeah.
I was put out there, I'm sure I would struggle, because they put you in a situation where it is difficult. Like, you literally is like you're scrounging, you are suffering.
Right.
Because you go there, the first thing you do is you get a shelter up, and then you have to try to find food. And by that time, everything's like, oh boy, there's a human here. Let's go, leave the area.
Well, I mean, there's shows like this one show called Naked and Afraid, and they are literally set out there with absolutely nothing on, and maybe 1 or 2 tools or something like that, from what I know about the show. And they have
like
to
a
figure
pot
out,
or a knife or something like that, or a fire steel.
right. They first have to be really, really smart, because I don't think that the people that run the show tell them what to bring. They have to be really smart about what they're bringing, and then
Exactly.
that, of course, what we were talking about earlier. It needs to be resourceful, so that it doesn't break, and it does what it's supposed to do. And then the fact that they're out there and they're fully naked, they have to figure out how to make clothing. Some of these people have absolutely no idea what the heck they're doing. I think that what the people do that run the show is they'll put them in an area where they'll probably be able to, if they are thinking about what's going on, they'll be able to see what the resources are that the land actually gives them, to be able to make their clothing and be able to take care of themselves. But a lot of them, because they have no clue.
I've seen one where they were taken out is because it was storming. It was the rain. They were like in one of those jungles, and it became such a dangerous situation, is that they were taken out. There was the producer says, "Come on, you're out. We're evacuating you."
Right.
And yeah, while they complained about that, I'm watching it. I'm saying, no, that's a good call.
Yes.
That's a very good call to take them out, even though their PSR may have dropped. It's better to do that than be carried out.
Exactly. There is a point in time when you have to say, I'm done. I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm going to kill myself because I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So
my advice is people who want to start getting into wilderness survival, want to test themselves, for God's sake, bring a backup.
Right.
Bring a pack full of food, water, gear, whatever. Just stash it off to the side, and then just go there. And if it gets too bad, you have to set the back up. And people think that's copping out. No, that's called strengthening your skills, because next time you may not need it.
Right.
90% mental, 10% skill.
Absolutely. So what we really need them to do is pay attention, understand what their skill set is, and mark up a little bit at a time so that they get something, they get involved in it, they start to understand what the situation is, and they can learn how to handle it, and from there progress to whatever the heck the next level is.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Don't go out there when you've never been out there and think,
Yeah,
hey,
with a knife and blanket, I'm going to live out there.
And I'm going to live off the land. You're going to die. you're just going to die. And we'd rather you not.
And I don't want people to get so, get beat up so bad that they just say, the hell with this. I'm never going to do this again because I got beat up. I'm sorry. It's like, as I said, bring gear, bring things like that. I mean, say, you know what? This time I'm going to go out there and work on fire, but I have my tent. I have my sleeping bag.
Right.
Just work on something, easy.
All right. So, James, why don't you ask a question or make a statement?
Yeah, I got a couple of questions here.
Thank you very much.
I might have a couple answers.
I got a quick one here talking about forging. All right, you get the zombie apocalypse happening. What would be the fastest and best weapon to forge?
So basically is it could be anything from like an edged weapon. It could be even just like hammering out a piece of leaf spring to where it's just like a kind of a mace at one end. Because all you have to do is just destroy the brain pan and that's it. You could even make with a railroad spike, a tomahawk. You have a spike on one end and a cutting edge on the other. And you just drive that through a piece of wood or just lash it on. And then it doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to be effective.
Functional, yeah. And not break.
Right.
Yep.
And not break. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
That's it. You're done. But hopefully, it's not advisable to just go out with just one thing when you're first starting out with this stuff. It's usually advisable to take at least 2 or 3 elements or devices with you. And a device, when I say device, doesn't mean your damn cell phone, because that cell phone can be rendered unusable. And,
where I live, where I live, it doesn't matter how high end your phone is. We have what's called dead zones.
Yes.
You drive out there, and for about 10 to 20 miles, you have no signal, none. We've had a couple of neighbors get stranded out there trying to call and have to walk 10, 15 miles just to get a signal to call for help.
Right. And that walk, if you're not used to doing it, is a bunch of hello no. So,
yeah.
All right. So, believe it or not, we are at 9:58, top of the hour almost for you. This is your first interview on Zombiepalooza Radio Live. What do you think about all of this?
Pretty cool. I think it's actually quite awesome.
Were you nervous?
You're a gracious host, and you have looks to boot.
Great, suck it up.
Yep.
And how much did Chin pay you to say that? All right, so hey, give a shout out to my husband. I think that he would like that.
Hey, Ken. Stormwolf, love you like a brother. So wish we could meet face to face.
All right. Eventually, one of these days, I'm going to get you and a bunch of other people from the tracker school, and his friend list from that, and get you all on and have a panel so that you guys can yak it up for
awesome
4 hours. All right. So, I appreciate your time. I appreciate the fact that you took the time to learn how to get on the show, and that we hope that you enjoyed your stay and will be back for more. So I thank you. And now it's time for me to give you over to my co-host and have him see you out.
All right.
Joe, it's been awesome. Very informative, too. I'm going to go out in the backyard here and start trying to survive just in the backyard.
Yeah, what you could do is always ask Jackie, because I do have a YouTube channel, and I do have some things on showing how to get fire going with like flint and steel and the like.
What's the YouTube channel? Real quick.
Oh, good grief. I believe it's called Joe Deer Runner. on the YouTube channel. I'm not sure exactly the address.
All right. So
but I
what
could forward.
Yeah, forward it to me, and what we'll do is we'll attach it when I send out the link for the show after it's rendered. And the show
Right here.
it won't be rendered until sometime mid-morning. So so give it a little time. 5 hours is a long time to render. But I gotta go to my next guest, or he's gonna think that I don't want him to be on. So I need to get him on. So we've been talking with Joe Schilling. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you later. Please go up to the top of the screen and click on the red phone. And
bye.
Good night, Joe.
Later,
Good
bye.
night.
Good night.
Talk to you later. Bye.
I'm like really thrilled that that went really well because I was kind of nervous and not really knowing exactly what kind of a direction that one was going to go, but it went very well. All right, so I know that it is now time for our next guest, Charles Phipps, to come on. And so I've sent him a link. I know he's listening. Click the link. And let's get you in here. Whew. All right, Joe Schilling, he did good. Let's get over here and see what the deal is here. I'm hoping. Oh, there he is!
Hello.
Oh, how are you?
Fine, thank you. Great to be here.
Good. Yes, thank you. All right, so, well, this is working nicely. All right, so what I want to do first is I have a special guest co-host with me. His name is James Barker. He's an actor and an indie professional. And so, James Barker, this is Charles Phipps. Charles, this is James Barker.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Good evening.
Good.
Welcome
All right.
to the show.
All right. Very cool. So, Charles, what I want you to do for people that may not know you, tell us who you are, what it is that you create, what genres that you create in, and what your latest project is.
Oh, hey. Well, my name is Charles Phipps. I go under the author name of C.T. Phipps. I write science fiction, post-apocalypse stories, and the occasional urban fantasy. My latest 3 works currently out because they came out one after the other is Lucifer's Star, which is a space opera told from the perspective of the usual bad guys in the evil empire. And 2 books I wrote one after the other because I was just in the frame of 9. I Was a Teenage Weredeer and An American Weredeer in Michigan.
That's quite interesting. All right, so science fiction. We seem to be having a theme like that going through the show tonight. Usually what I do is I bring on apocalyptic and horror. So for those who may be new to your genre, talk to us a little bit about what science fiction is to you and the kinds of areas in which you create your science fiction.
Well, really, science fiction is the other side of the coin from fantasy. It's the question of what we are capable of imagining as possible, and it doesn't matter if it's magic or science that is making the speculative fiction elements come to life. You just have to let your mind free and embrace whatever the premise is. In the case of Lucifer's Star, it's a full-on kind of Star Wars universe with electrical swords, starfighters, and all these things that don't make a lot of sense in real life once you get computerized warfare going on. But that's not why we're here. It's to enjoy the metaphor, so to speak, of World War II in space, and in this case, the fact our protagonist has to deal with, wait, are we the bad guys? Especially after things fall apart for him and his life, and he has to put them back together.
You know that I've heard there are a lot of different kinds of things that creatives in science fiction have dreamed up, so to speak, and put in their works that have actually become actual technology that we really do use. And so when I hear someone say that science fiction is kind of like out there and nobody really thinks that any of this is possible, they clearly don't understand the genre.
Well, it depends on what you're using as your premise there. You're very correct that sometimes science fiction has been an immense influence on what we actually create with science. For instance, the most famous of these inventions created by science fiction would be the submarine. I mean,
Yes.
Leonardo da Vinci came up with the idea there, but the first nuclear-powered submarine was named the Nautilus. And definitely, by putting out these ideas, you can have people much, much smarter than I trying to figure out how to make it a reality. And sometimes it happens there. I mean, we still haven't gotten the hoverboard from Back to the Future, but it's not from lack of trying.
I know, right? You know, I want that, but I think that they kind of sort of got the shoes to tie, but I don't know. It still doesn't look like it was in the movie. It's kind of like going to it's kind of like seeing a commercial on television, and you go for that particular thing that you're going to consume, and you get it on the plate, and it's like, oh, what?
Yeah. We call that the
Yeah,
Olive
that's
Garden in my house.
Yeah, and Olive Garden is really not Italian food. It just really isn't. That's from my Sicilian background, though. I think my relatives would probably smash me if I
Oh,
said
yes.
I even liked it at all. So,
Oh, yeah. In my book, I get to
absolutely.
analyze a bunch of ideas that I just threw together there, but I was mostly just trying to tell the best story I possibly could. It's a personal story about where do you go when what you believe is not true. In this case, it's the aftermath of the Great War rather than trying to sell the war itself. And the protagonist, Cassius Mass, which is just a name I just felt was suitably spacey but kind of believable, is a former starfighter pilot for the Archduchy of Crius, which is an awful, awful government that he just totally believed was there to bring order and peace and justice. And eventually the rest of the galaxy teamed up and smashed it to pieces. And
All
only
right, so
afterwards.
you do a lot of world building for your works.
Oh, yes.
All right. We had a gentleman on our first hour, I believe. Yes, first hour. And a lot of his format surrounded world building. He had one where he was working at it for like 30 or 40 years. I don't assume that you've been working on your world building for that long, but what is the process and how long has your world been evolved, and talk to us a little bit about the kinds of things that happen.
Oh, world building is something that I think was a major draw for me for creating this because while I often do my urban fantasy in the present day, this world, the options for doing a space opera is you have to create everything from how people live, whether it's in this world or a galaxy far, far away, and just everything from how they eat, sleep, drink, and even their romantic relationships, and just sketch out notebooks there. And Lucifer Star started actually 5 or 6 years ago, and it was just in the back of my head. And I have definitely had to sketch out the notebooks long before I was able to put anything from pen to paper. I mean, you can sort of skip things a bit by either going like, okay, I'll take that from Star Trek and that from Star Wars, that from but and that from Alien. But really, you all have to make, once you put it all together in a pot, it becomes its own thing.
Right.
And it's definitely hard. And my process though is I just basically create the characters first there, and with what created them and how do they interact with the world. And if it makes sense, then I know it works. And if it doesn't, well, I have to start from square one.
Because people who read in those particular genres especially are very nitpicky and aware of how that particular genre is
Oh, I wouldn't say the literary fans are any different in horror there. I mean, let's just talk about the slow zombie versus fast zombie.
Oh,
Do
yeah,
they die if they're shot in the head? Do they continue coming?
but they have to have particular elements, and if you get those elements out of
Do
sync,
vampires explode in sunlight or sparkle?
right, then it kind of like ticks some of us off because we're so done with that whole whatever the heck that show was and book was and all of that.
Oh yes.
But you're going to have that too. You even have that in the genres that you write in. That there'll be somebody that will try to gussy it up so much that it is to the point of ridiculousness.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes. Well, that actually brings up those two urban fantasy things because I was originally writing them as a, from a horror perspective, actually, and the idea being that their urban fantasy is that the heroine just was so snarky and done with it that it became more or less became the furry version of Buffy.
Oh.
Well, the joke idea was I wanted to write serious horror fiction, and then I realized this character would just be so much funnier if she was the least threatening form of shape changer possible, and still somehow able to stand up against it.
Very cool.
And that became a very entertaining premise. And as you may know from the two titles, they're all parodies of werewolf movies, and I'm going to continue doing that. I'm trying to figure out what exactly to do to make a parody of The Howling, because I don't think deer make any particular noise. Maybe the bleeding.
Ketchup or something? I don't know.
Yeah.
Syrup? I don't know.
Salt snaps, perhaps.
Snacks.
Brotherhood of the Deer.
That could work. I don't know.
Underwood.
There. All right. So we obviously are having a good time in talking about how these kinds of elements can be changed out and put to a particular light so that it is almost comedic. Sometimes that's not a bad idea because when we read, we want to be entertained. So when you create your works, are you creating it from the idea of who's going to read it, or from where you want to read a book like this?
I definitely go with the second there, because as when I try to write for a specific audience, it usually verbs in directions I don't quite expect. To go with Lucifer's star there, I was originally thinking about creating my own deep, serious, epic sci-fi novel there, and it just sort of evolved into just my own love of the genre and trying to write about the elements I would not normally see. I think the way I described it was I saw The Force Awakens like, well, that was okay, but not what I wanted from Star Wars, so I made my own novel from the perspective of, war's kind of hell. And with the Weirdy books, I was thinking, like, I need to get on some of that young adult action, and the final result, no, not even close. I wouldn't let any kids there. Yeah, it's more Evil Dead with Buffy and Cabin in the Woods.
Adults will like a lot, All right, so do you, for those who may be not curious, do you write in young adult, or do you really more focus on like 18 and over?
Well, it's I definitely write whatever comes to mind that I am inspired to write. I jump genres quite a bit. Last time I was on here, I talked about Cthulhu Armageddon, which is my post-apocalypse western, which is the great old ones rise, destroy the world, and humanity's just like living in little villages and towns all around with gunplay against the deep ones. And that's a pretty out there high concept to begin with. And then, of course, I just told you I'm doing a science fiction novel there. And then I'm now doing the comedic horror, urban fantasy kind of thing. So it really is just what the mood I'm going in for. I tried to write young adult there, but then it ended up starting with a serial killer on the loose. So while certainly more young adults are much more able to read mature content than we ever give them credit for, I don't think it was going to be an experiment that would work for me. I'm definitely writing for adults. And if
Cool. So you are able to write across genres, and it seems like with ease. Although maybe it might not be in reality. But what do you attribute to being able to do that?
Well, I think it's actually a less difficult problem once you let go of the idea it should be a problem. The idea is really write the characters first, and once you have the rules for the setting, it should be easy to do. The way I describe my process is I create the characters to the point that they're vivid enough that I know how they're going to react in just about any situation, and then I see how they react to whatever situation I can try for them. If you really know a character, then you know how they'll react to a vampire or a box falling on on their relatives full of hammers or whatever, and it becomes a sort of test of like a little rat in the maze if I want to be really mean to them.
Absolutely. But then what the situation is that you caused a particular problem for a group of people and or other creatures, and they have to figure out how to be able to get out of that problem and move along and still be alive.
Oh, definitely. And the difference between post-apocalypse Western and say Westeros's Game of Thrones is really just how the players are set up, because people are people. It's like, you know, you have the slasher movie. It's a very easy setting up there. You have the quote unquote normal teenagers, and you have suddenly ruining their sense of safety and seeing them all run around like with their heads cut off, and how they react. Or you can have much harder, tougher Marine versus, say, Jason, and obviously those will be two different stories, but it's ultimately all about the characters.
Exactly. All right, so now we're going to get into character building. We talked a bit about world building. When I've done the show in the past, there have been some people that have said that it's like they get introduced to their characters, almost like them being in a green room, and then when the author says next, they come up and they say what they look like, what their past is, and all that kind of thing. But then there are times when creatives will tell me it's almost like they're putting these people together in a Franken-style sense, where they're taking bits of one, maybe a person that they know or something that struck them in a particular way while they were in the process of creating. For you, what was it like in because you cross so many genres, you just pick a genre that you want, and talk to me about what it was like to be able to develop these characters.
Well, really, I see writing as a process of getting to know who the characters are, because I think I start with a broader concept of who they are, and as I write, often new details will come to mind, and they become incorporated into my knowledge of who the character actually is. Starting with Lucifer Star, I had the idea of what if we had the kind of guy who had everything going for him and thought of himself as a great military hero and a officer and a gentleman, and then just stick him eventually 5 years later in the role of a very drunk, disorderly Han Solo, and see like, okay, how did these this guy become this guy from who he was, and what does that inform about him and his way of viewing the world? And then with Jane, her name is Jane Doe because I was totally not taking this as seriously as I should have. Yes. Oh, yeah. I was starting with the premise of, so who I wanted, if I'm going to have a book set in a small town full of supernatural murders, who would be the best protagonist I could, and came up with the title of I Was a Teenage Weirder. I was like, one person who was much, much smarter than everyone else, and unfortunately in a world where even when she has supernatural powers, they don't give her much benefit because she runs really fast is basically the limit of them.
Cool.
Yeah,
All right.
and just going with the idea of I drew elements from people in real life and like my wife and and friends I've had over the years, and just gave her all the snark and disdain for small town life I grew up with.
Do you create storyboards, because you do world building? Do you have any kind of pictures or anything like that for visual to be able to do this, and or like notebooks for collecting information on each one of these characters?
One of the best authors I know, David Neal Wilson, who is also one of my publishers, said that there are two kinds of ways of writing. One is by the seat of your pants, and one is a plotter, where you get every little detail. So I generally go down the middle by when I start a book, I list about a dozen things, one after the other, that I would want in the book and I think would be cool, and then start plotting out, okay, this is how I sort of see it going. And then when I start going it, usually I don't get anywhere near what I originally planned, but follow where my gut instinct, like, oh, it would be cool if something like this happened, or it's like this part is a little slow. Why don't a bunch of demons attack or whatever?
Fair enough. All right, so James, he has a question for you. Go ahead.
Do you ever have a character jump genres and jump books?
In fact, that's kind of an interesting point there, because the books that got me started as an author were my supervillainy saga books, which have sold really well, and I'm actually sort of doing, because it's a comic book world, a crossover with some of my other books, because I can do that in a comic book world. They just to see if it would be completely ridiculous or actually incredibly fun, just to dump my character in my other worlds.
When you make these creations, do you ever collaborate with anyone, or is this some stuff that you generally just do on your own?
I am currently working on a number of collaborations, but it's funny you ask, because both Lucifer Star and I Was a Teenage Weredeer both have listed as a co-author Michael Sutkis, who is a longtime friend of mine, who we have had a 20-year friendship of discussing fantasy and so on there, and he helped me plot out and refine some world details.
Very cool. All right, James, do you have another question?
When you do the dialogue, are you talking in a mirror, talking to somebody else?
When I try and do dialogue, which is really the secret for how I actually have been able to get all of my books done, I just often, like 75%, is just them playing off one another. I just try and switch characters in my head and see, like, okay, they said this, how would this other character react to that, and bounce off each other that way. It's back from my tabletop role-playing game, Dungeons and Dragons and so on. There, if I was very good at getting into character, and if I can do that for everyone, then it works.
All right, let's talk about RPG. Seems to be a theme going through this show. Talk about how you first started getting into RPG, and then talk about what, if you had a particular character in the role play, or if you were, let's say, a dungeon master, or the different kinds of steps. Why I'm asking you that is because I do think that plays a good amount, especially within these particular genres that you write in.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think tabletop role-playing games were great training for a lot of would-be authors who grew up in the 80s and 90s. And in my case, when I was a completely redneck-dressed goth in the high school, because I was always into Vampire the Masquerade and White Wolf, and that really taught me about the ideas of getting into all the dark, seedy elements that became the basis for urban fantasy. And it also taught me a bit about world building, because you need, when you're a game master, you have to develop all the situations for characters to be involved in, even if it is free. And the freeform element does teach you, again, also how to move around things and think on your feet, which I think is good training for being an author. I mean, I couldn't do it the way I was in high school. I would come up with some very boring adventures involving katanas and trench coats, but it definitely informed my later writing, and gave me a good basis for understanding its character first. And do I have any special characters? Oh yes, definitely. Probably some that eventually became in my books. I played, never really stopped playing. Still occasionally do a game every weekend or so.
Good. My son Joshua Chin is dungeon master. Just became one, I think, sometime earlier on this year, and seems to really enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
It's a fodder for the mind.
It is, and it keeps them off of the, all of that kind of pew pew stuff.
Some video games are every bit as good as tabletop role playing, but in the end, the mind is much freer when you have dice and graph paper.
Yeah, when you can create what you want to have happen and visualize it in your head. Those kinds of processes are really important when, sometimes even in survival situations. If you're able to process a role-playing game and follow, from start to finish all the way through, then it allows your mind to be able to process other more intricate things that you may come across with in real life. And although we know that real life is not fantasy, sometimes that becomes a very, very important element to being able to keep you from getting into some trouble that you probably shouldn't. So, and unfortunately, with the world that we live in, people can be rather nasty to each other, and sometimes you have to be more aware. Oh, and off my soapbox for that one. I don't even know how that happened. James, how did you let that happen? All right, so characters. Since we're on that particular level, how do you motivate your characters to do what you want them to do? And I know that might sound like a weird question because you're the one that's creating them, but how do you keep them in line or in check, so to speak, to be able to get them from where you originally started to where you need them to go?
Oh, well, there's just no way possible to keep them, and you really shouldn't try and box them in that way. I've actually had to throw out half-completed manuscripts because where the characters were going that I wanted them to just wasn't feeling authentic to them, and it was hurting the overall narrative as a process. Really, the best way to get a really good or at least entertaining book, I don't make any pretensions to being Stephen King just yet, is let them run wild and see where they take you. Just going on with, say, Cassius there, if I have him in this case, he's meeting a character and they're going to become good friends. And in fact, no, I think they would probably hate each other. That actually makes a more interesting dynamic. And even if that doesn't go the way I wanted to, or I have to rewrite the situation, it may and make the book feel all the more unexpected and works.
Or even more real.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so James, do you have any questions at this point?
No, I'm thinking as we go, but no.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
But yeah, one of my more famous moments, at least among my wonderfully devoted little fan base, is I had the book set up for in my supervillainy saga, two characters being love interest together, and the two characters just utterly despised each other, and eventually that just made the story all the better.
Absolutely. Sometimes when you think that it is going to go a particular way, then it veers off, jump off the bridge, that kind of thing. unfortunately or fortunately, that's the way life is. Like life is not always exactly the way we plan things out. One of one of the quotes that I used to like a lot, which now of course escapes me, was in of Mice and Men. I think it's something about being properly planned and then it goes awry at the last minute.
Oh yeah. One another great moment that I was writing is I had half of a book planned. In fact, Lucifer Star, where it was all about just the characters deciding to do the right thing and go after the bad guys and seeing how that would all fall out. And then when I write it, it just wasn't flowing. And I realized, my characters would just say the hell with it and leave. And seeing how the results of that happened made a really I think probably one of the best moments in the book. There was like, screw it, just let them sort it out.
Right,
and seeing them escape.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about environment. All right, and I want you to pick a genre that you would like to talk about environment where it is very, very important.
Well, I think you're talking about literary environment, right? I'm just making sure.
Yeah.
But I definitely think that's always the case in any sort of serious writing, because the environment informs the mood of the book. There's a reason that so many horror novels and even take place in small towns and isolated places, because obviously you need somewhere where you can't run away to the authorities or just get away, or there's other victims for the nebulous monster to go. The sense of alienation, and it's also why zombie movies tend to play a place in either the very isolated rural areas or the deeply populated areas, because both create different sort of environments that your characters have to deal with, and it also informs about how they react. You really can't make a story that just will be the same anywhere, because obviously everything we do is informed by what's around us and how people react, and also the characters' past. I mean, if a character is from bumbuck nowhere, then they are going to have a attitude toward that place. I mean, they're thinking, it was such a nice place to be from, I miss it, or I am so glad to be gone there. And it also plays off about how they do with other people. Right. I think Stephen King obviously tapped into something very well when he created his own little Castle Rock and Maine areas, because everyone could relate to the small town desperation, and that played well into the greater themes of something alien and foreign coming into their lives that utterly wrecked it, or had been there all along, hidden underneath the seeming Mayberry-esque environments.
Right. All right. I think James has a question. Go ahead. Unless that was a later message and I missed it.
Yeah, I think it was.
See, I told you it's my first rodeo. I don't know what else to say about that. All right, so perspective. Perspective is everything. Perspective in a creative is especially important, because it gives us a bit of an idea of what their background is or what they deem either important or not important. And so in that, I'm going to ask you, what perspective do you bring to your works as a creative?
Well, I think if I had to judge my own style and look about all my books, I generally kind of take the view of there's all sorts of already well-established tropes and environments in so many different kind of books, and everyone has seen 3 or 4 different variants on Tolkien alone if they've read any sort of fantasy whatsoever. Right. Because people see something that they like and they want to do their own version. So it's the same way with Alien and horror, or Night of the Living Dead, or and so on and so on. And the perspective I try to do is I very much often take the typical example of a genre and attempt to deconstruct it and see how it works. It's like a watch and taking it apart. One of my fantasy novels is called Wraith Knight, which was from the perspective of a creature which is, for all intents and purposes, a ring wraith. It's like, how did this person become who he is? What does he think, if he thinks at all still? And if, say, at the end of The Lord of the Rings and Sauron dies, does that mean it just goes away, or is it free now? And how would it view the world being something that should not be? And that was like, that's a very interesting perspective. It's like, I mean, people have done the vampire novel from the vampire's perspective for centuries. That is a century now, and so it's no longer a new and original. But there's so many other classic stories which we can take apart and see from a different perspective.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. All right, so because you're right, because again, I'm sorry?
I said I got one. I got a question.
Dude.
Regale me.
See? Every once in a while it happens too. Out of the whole writing process and building the book itself, what's the hardest part about doing that?
Oh, that's an interesting. Well, it really is what part of the that I'm currently doing. That's the issue. If I had to say what is the absolute most tedious part, it is revisiting what you've already done there in the editing process and seeing about how you did before and what you would do differently, and resisting the urge to tinker, because as George Lucas shows, you really shouldn't do that. A story is done when it's done, and while you can add and this, you can't change its fundamental flow. If you don't like the result, you just have to put it in the slush pile and forget about it. Like the warehouse at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. I mean, I've got like quite a few novels that will never see the light of day, but I still keep there. With the rest, I think I rewrote Cthulhu Armageddon like 6 times in direct defiance of this rule, and I really shouldn't have. It finally worked out there, but
yeah, sometimes
I had to start from square one.
Yeah, sometimes when done is done, it's done, and there's nothing else you can do except let it ride. And a lot of times, so when you do get your final product, there seems to be some kind of an awakening process that happens. Yes, it's finished. Okay, so let's send it off. The process of going through edits and all of that is not really a way to be able to rewrite it, so to speak, but to be able to sharpen it up and be able to get it to the next process that we can get it printed and all that fun stuff.
I'm one of those writers who finds it very difficult to reread his own work. It's like, I know what happens here at this point, so it's just you have to force yourself to go each line by line there through the editing. And
it's very difficult.
Do you self-edit?
My editors would hate me if I didn't. So I force myself to go over and say, like, yes, this line, and this one, and they still find all the manner of mistakes there. But thank God for them. Yes.
And all right. So
you do both the self-editing and use an actual editor too at the same time.
Well, if I have to, otherwise it would be they'd be all there all day. I write from my emotions, like okay, there's like 42 mistakes in this one thing, but I wrote down what I wanted. If I stopped to edit myself, I'd never get anything done during the process.
All right, so whom are your editors that you use most often?
Oh, I definitely have the good people at Crossroad Press and Amber Cove, which are my 2 publishers, and they have their own little stable. And I'm going to give a shout out to a man named David Dodd, who has been extremely patient with me at Crossroad Press there, and explaining, no, Charles, it does not work that way. You really should change that when you are first writing. And I'm like, really? Because it looks right, and it's like, yeah, it doesn't.
But that's why they get the big bucks. And, they
Not from
they're
his
supposed
perspective.
well, then
I'm sorry.
hopefully you're feeding them or something. You gotta give them something, because that work doing that
Yes.
is very tedious.
You'll get your
et cetera,
gruel.
et cetera. I know, right?
Yeah, everyone
right.
in Crossroad Press and Amber Cove are both. They're larger than normal indie presses, but they obviously are just doing it for the love of the work.
That's very cool. All right, so it may be that I will go to their publication house and ask to see if they would like to have a evening that is filled with Crossroad Press, because I do that every once in a while.
Oh yeah, they and kind of interesting note there. They do Brian Lumley's audiobooks and Clive Barker's.
Oh, very nice.
Yes,
And,
even though it's again a smaller, a larger indie press, it's still an indie press. Though it was really impressive that those two people, who are names familiar to most horror fans, that they wanted to do it with them.
That's very. You touched on a subject that we don't get to talk about too much on here. There is a number of large presses that are out there that are not indie press, and what ends up happening is they go through, or they have people that go through what is popular now in the indie press world, and every once in a while somebody will get picked from that because of their social media following, or because of their reviews that they find.
Oh, yeah.
And have you seen anything like that happen?
I have seen it and actually been offered it myself. There was a dark fantasy novel by an associate of mine online called The Grey Bastards, which was originally self-published. It was a novel from the perspective of orcs, and it's been picked up, and now is going to be definitely a widely produced, larger novel in 2018. And interesting enough, Crossroad Press does that with self-publishing, so it's a smaller version that happens. I've known a couple of friends, such as Seth Skorkowski, who did the Valdekin urban fantasy novels. He's going to be moving from his self-publishing and a much smaller press that he no longer works with to Crossroad Press. So it's definitely a case. And I also received an offer to move to a larger press, but I turned that down because ultimately I didn't feel that the deal they were offering would have improved on my situation versus what I was selling now.
Very interesting. And yes, I have heard some of my creatives say that has happened to them too. Sometimes you need to not just look at what the big name is on the publishing house. Sometimes you need to take a look around at where you are in your point of your writing career, and those who really do have your best interest. Sometimes what happens is some big box will go and they'll look at your stuff and they'll say, hey, yeah, we want it, and then they switch it around, maybe a bunch or maybe only a little bit, but what they'll do is they'll kind of like take it from you, and then all of a sudden it becomes theirs, and they do with it what they want.
Well, I've definitely had some stories, both good and bad, from my publishing experience there. Definitely the case with smaller presses. There are plenty of people that just don't know what they're doing, or they take advantage of the fact that take advantage of the fact that people who tend to do independent are either usually just starting out or not quite aware that the promises they're being made aren't entirely true.
Right.
And with larger presses, there's the idea that you're going to get the standard rich and famous contract for the Muppets, and it just does not remotely end up being that way. And whereas like you're getting 5% out of the book sales, and the book sales there, and not even. Right. Whereas in with the work I get a much larger chunk of the money done. And while sales may or may not be bigger, they are definitely much more fair, and that's why so many are going hybrid now, as they call it.
Yes, and then yes, okay. So we're now on the subject of hybrid. There are some people who do partake in the big box, but they also enjoy that freedom that indie press gives them, especially if they get with a good publishing house. The idea is it's to make money, but it is also to make sure that you, number one, don't alienate your fan base, because you worked hard to be able to get that, and it takes a very long time to be able to get established in most cases, and you don't want to give that up.
Oh yeah, it's an interesting time to be an author, given how things like Amazon.com and the fact that books are now perpetually in print, so to speak, has changed the direction of publishing as because bookstores, while they're still there, aren't quite the factor they used to be.
Right. Yeah.
And
we have. Go ahead.
Oh well, interesting enough. Technically, I do qualify as a hybrid publisher because Wraith Knight, that book I mentioned, which was from the perspective of a ring wraith, is the only book so far that you could have purchased in stores, and was sold across that, and I got paid diddly/squat overall for the sales of it. But it did, however, fulfill the lifelong dream of where I could point out to say, just go down to your local Barnes and Noble and pick it up. So if I ever have to deal with a relative asking, so when are you going to be a real author, I can always point out that.
Yeah, no. All right. So now you touched on another subject that is kind of like, wonky. All right. So
I mean, really for me, it's independent publications all the way there. I don't do self-publishing, but I like doing with one of the larger indie presses because it's a nice balance between the personal attention and fairer contracts, with the fact I do have professionals dealing with business, and that's why so many other famous authors have started either founding their own publishing houses or just trying to work in the margins, because they just it's the machine falls down on the writer.
Right, absolutely. All right, so
do I think that indies are real authors? Absolutely, and this is the day and age where someone who makes their own book and self-publishes could theoretically sell like 200,000 copies on Kindle or whatever, even if more likely they'll probably sell 15.
All right, so I've had some authors on my show that have written white papers and PhD level books and textbooks and all of this other kind of thing. And they don't normally get the question of, okay, so when are you going to be a real author? But when we travel over into people who create in science fiction or horror or apocalyptic or some of these other more creative things like urban fantasy, they do get questions like that from just regular people, maybe family members, maybe people on their page that go, I know you can write better than that, and when are you going to start doing that, because I'm looking for something that has some intelligence factor. Really?
Well, I always am thinking, okay, we're past the point where fantasy and horror and genre fiction is looked down upon, and then someone proves me wrong. we have the Lord of the Rings movies, and we have Game of Thrones, and everyone is watching them, and they're like, needless to say, well, you're just writing for kids, huh? And I'm just like, you're an idiot.
Yes, absolutely. All right, James made a written statement in there. I want him to voice this.
Yeah, I heard you saying, people saying are indie writers real authors. It's like in our industry, our background actors real actors, and yeah, we are. We have to act. We act from point A to point B.
Oh yeah, there's there's something that I use as a metaphor there. Leonard Nimoy was obviously most famous for Star Trek there, but he eventually started doing tiny shows for about 20 years afterward, and that's where he stretches acting chops the most, according to him.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing with indie is it's a matter of your big break isn't necessarily your artistic peak, and your big break very often isn't. And with the best benefits of of the modern age and social media, there are many more opportunities available than there used to be, where it was all under the control of people who just wanted one thing and one thing only.
Exactly. All right, go indie.
Go indie. I do have a quick one. What advice would you give to upcoming writers about publishing houses?
Well, it's definitely a case of know what you're going for and how. The first question when you're being a writer is don't put the cart before the horse. First, make your book and make it good, and your audience will find you. And if your audience finds you, then you can maybe start seeking out a publishing house for a larger audience, which strikes many people as counterintuitive. But really, this is the age where you can create I think it's better to create your own work, and then maybe even publish it yourself before seeking out a publishing house. But if you are going to seek out a publishing house, big or small, you should definitely investigate first and definitely network as much as you can too, because this is an industry where if you are going to have any kind of success, it's best to know someone who has experience and get their perspective first.
All right, let's talk about that. Very often in this show, we have the focus in on networking and marketing and social media and all that, but the networking is not always done by social media. There are other avenues to do it, but it seems like it is the most easiest for many. When you started going to, I would say, the next level of your writing path, whom did you go to for either a mentorship or a camaraderie to be able to help you?
I lived a somewhat zigzaggy sort of path there. I went to a writer's workshop where I met a literary agent, and she pointed me to a small press back then that was still respected, which was Permuted Press, which did all the wonderful zombie novels before it got sold. And I went to a writing group on their forums and associated with some other aspiring writers, and some of them went on to bigger and better things that I knew them from, and they introduced me to other people and so on there until I met David Neal Wilson, who was a writer who's done work for everything from Star Trek to White Wolf novels to his own, and he was the guy who founded Crossroad Press because he really did not like that experience and wanted to provide authors their own alternative. And from there, I work with him, and I've been helping other authors by pointing to places I've succeeded in and failed with.
Okay.
The fail with being don't go there. These people suck.
You know what? I got a long list in the 5 years that I've been doing this show. I thought I had a nice group of people when we first started getting going with this. It was regular. It was great, and they were writing, they were creating, they were hanging out. And then life happened, and then egos happened, and then dare I say, crap happened. And they're not always going to be the same people that you end up with, but it is important to have those kinds of experiences. It also shows you personally whether or not you're making growth or you're falling back. And sometimes what happens is you get to a point where you're stagnant and you you feel like that plateau thing going on, and then you're like, well, do I go forward? Do I go backward? And what you end up doing is just staying in place, and that's not always a bad thing.
One.
You know,
Oh, sorry.
but go ahead.
Well, one thing I was going to say was, speaking as an indie author of only about 5 years, I've seen dozens of seemingly very stable small publishing houses collapse, and
Yes.
the little burst can be very disheartening for people who are thinking like, I'm going to make my career with this one group of people that are my friends and I
Right.
trust and so on, and then the finances situation just either explodes or personal happens there. One group that I was involved with, and I'm not going to name names, the money just all disappeared without any payments done, because
Right.
they used it to expand rather than pay their authors, and they were just left kind of homeless. And there was a lot of hurt feelings and anger, and they were just like,
but it happens a lot.
Oh, yeah.
A lot more than what people know. I myself have witnessed, I think 4 or 5, would say medium-sized to beginning to be large-size indie companies just absolutely implode on themselves, and you're like, because I would go for the authors that would be in these publishing houses, and if you go through my timeline of how this show is, you would find out who they are, probably.
Oh, yeah.
I just don't understand how people who seem to have such very professional-minded ideas of how to do the process will just lose their vision and start to backbite each other, or start to trash talk some of the authors that put them in the position they're there to begin with.
I have the easy way of describing it. One thing about the indie press situation is it's always soccer teams with so many people. Everyone thinks like, I'm on team this company, or I'm on the team of the authors who are complaining, and very often they end up playing against each other rather than trying to support one another. With some of the companies I follow, it usually happens that some authors start seeing the writing on the wall first, and then get really angry, and then other authors come to defend the company, only to find out it's a worse situation than they even suspected to begin with. And after these companies explode the way they do, and they very often do, they're left disillusioned, don't know if they're going to write again, or have issues with their own rights. I think I had to spend like 6 months getting a Wraith Knight back from the company I'd been working with. But and the thing about that is, it just means that you just have to keep a certain level of wariness and looking out for yourself, which is something many authors who are bright and idealistic don't do. And once you look after yourself, and you'll eventually find the people that you can trust and work with on a professional level. And
it will happen eventually. It might not happen like
keep at it, and keep a knife at your boot.
I know, right? Because you might need it, and I don't know. I have had a situation where I got very intensely involved with a particular production group, and it took about 6 months of my life in working like 12, 14-hour days trying to do things. Hi, I wasn't ready for you yet. So go ahead and put your mic on mute, please. And thank you very much. All right. So, but in doing that, it takes a lot out of you to be able to process how you're going to do particular things within that indie company. And you have a lot of different kinds of personalities you have to deal with. You have a lot of different kinds of genres sometimes that you have to deal with. And it takes a lot of serious work to be able to help an author to be able to develop their platform and make sure that they stand out as an individual in a company of other indie creators.
Oh yes. Before we go, there is one actual story that I think relates to this that you'd find interesting. Going with Permuted Press there, when it was purchased, it was very much a shining example of really good indie horror and zombie stories and post-apocalypse tales. And not to diss the other company there, but for whatever reason, they opened a second print house which did nonfiction, and ended up, I'm not sure this is a good thing, to have gotten Oliver North's biography somehow, that they were publishing this nonfiction house there, and they were making much more money doing that. So they moved all of their resources from horror to a nonfiction, right-wing fiction, and at that point it was like, I am out of there.
I have tons of things I could say about that particular company and Michael, the guy that.
Oh yeah, well, say no more.
You know what? Right, because you're gone. I'm still here. We're still here.
Well, I'm glad I survived, and I'm looking forward to hearing the interview with the next author, because I love her work.
All right. Well, if you wanna hang, if you would like to hang, you can do that, and
certainly.
She might not mind. All right. So, but I am going to close out your hour officially, and then you can come in with the next one, and I'm like babbling. I don't know why, because this is my first rodeo. All right. So, we have been listening to CT Phipps, and thank you so much for coming on to the show. And we hope that you enjoyed your experience and that you will be back to do another interview. Thank you very much. And James, go ahead and say your final to him so that we may get on to our brand new guest. Yeah!
Thank you, Charles, for coming on the show. It's been awesome.
Yes.
I quite enjoyed it myself. Jackie, I have some personal issues I have to go take care of, so I will catch you later.
Absolutely. I'll
Thank you for having me on.
Take care of you.
I will.
Sound like Yoda now for some reason. I don't know. All right. I'll see you later. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
All right. So we are now on our fourth hour. I should say that a little bit more clearly. We have M.L. Spencer here. She is brand new to Zombiepalooza Radio Live. Appreciate your time coming on. So you can go ahead and unmute yourself as we are officially in your hour. Go ahead and tell people who have not met you yet and know what your work is, who you are, what genre or genres that you create in, and what your latest project is that you want us to focus in on.
Okay, well, hi, my name is M.L. Spencer, and I really enjoyed watching CT Phipps. He's one of my favorite authors too, so that was kind of cool. I write a series called The Renoir Saga, and right now it consists of 3 novels, and they're all very dark, in title at least. The first one is called Dark Storm, then Dark Mage, then Dark Lands, which is probably the one we should be focusing on today. And right now I'm in the process of writing book 4, which is Dark Rise. And these kind of exist in a darker version of epic fantasy. I think it's borderline grimdark, maybe not fully there, but definitely has a lot of the tropes of the grimdark genre, I would say. So I'm just really happy to be here. It seems like an amazing show. And I'm loving your background.
Thank you. This was made by an amazing graphic artist. And right now his name escapes me, but I will make sure that I get it out there sometime before the show is out. All right, so going through your bio here, I want to hop over to your Amazon page, and I'm going to do that right now. And so dystopian fantasy?
Yeah. It doesn't really start out that way. It becomes dystopian after book 1, when pretty much what happens is the equivalent of a magical nuclear kind of winter settles over half of the world, which kind of enshrouds that area in cloud cover and burns or scorches the earth. And then you have this land that's just full of darkness and doesn't have any sunlight. And there's people who live there, and they've been eking out their existence now for 1,000 years in total darkness.
I normally don't talk about myself on these shows, but there has been a dream sequence that I've had where a world like that, it's kind of like this cross between Blade Runner and some kind of weird, odd kind of thing happening. And I think I might have some stuff for your maybe your next book, or maybe a book in this series.
Hey, I think that's awesome. Never underestimate the power of the subconscious.
I know, right? All right, so let's see here. We're going to go over to the first book that you have, and it's called Dark Storm. All right, so give me a little bit of a synopsis on this particular work, and then we're going to talk a bit about your world building and character development.
Okay. Dark Storm happens about 1,000 years before the rest of the series. In fact, it's probably more of a prequel than it is a book one. It has a couple of characters that it centers around two brothers, Brayden and Quinn, who are both mages. And they kind of stumble across this dark, evil plot by some of the master mages of their society, who are trying to basically save their world by opening a gateway to hell. It kind of all results from a catastrophe that happens with the magic system. My planet has a magic field in addition to a magnetic field. And every so many years, the magic field kind of does a polar reversal, which has the capacity of destroying everything ever created by magic, along with all the magic users in the entire world. And obviously, they don't want that to happen. Their entire society is based on magic, and all the infrastructure, everything else, the knowledge will be lost, along with, you know, a lot of the good proportion of the population decimated. So opening the gateway to hell seems like a great idea to them.
We're kind of sort of trying to do that with CERN, so they think or say.
Yeah.
You know, opening a portal and having Kara, or whatever the heck the name is of the fighting demon that comes out of this thing. Sometimes what happens is we think that we can make things better or get more power by opening up realms that we probably have absolutely no clue as to what's really inside them, but we have our either mortal or magical way of thinking that we can control what comes out of it.
Exactly, our hubris. Sometimes we stumble over our hubris, definitely. So I guess in the book, that's kind of what it's about. It's about the two factions that are kind of trying to vie against each other. Those that think it's a great idea to unleash the unknown to save their butts, and those that are trying to stop them at their own expense. And honestly, it's kind of a toss-up as to which camp a reader will get into, whether they'll support the good guys or think, you know, these guys are kind of crazy. So
all right, so let me think of how long did it take you to actually create this environment before you started writing, or did the environment create itself as you were writing?
That's a great question. I honestly have been writing this series for probably the past 15, 20 years. Just little by little, world building, doing a little bit of work, checking it out, doing some more work, checking it out, and just expanding files and files and files. The first book that I actually wrote was book 2. It was not book 1. I wrote that back in 2002, and I did a lot of world building then. But I couldn't get it published, so I put it in my closet and never looked at it again for 10 years. Then I decided, oh, to heck with it. And I took out the idea again, and that's when I got the idea of the whole reversal of the magic field and everything. And that's when I went back and I wrote what is now book 1. And so I guess I'll have to say it kind of came about slowly and evolved over time, definitely, as to the big nature of the threat to the world coming from its own magic system.
Very cool. All right. Do you yourself do any kind of RPG games or delve into any of those systems where it would be very beneficial for you to learn how to create something and do it well so that you don't get killed off?
Oh, definitely. I've been gaming since the days of mud games, honestly. So I've been playing computer-based RPG games pretty much most of my life. When I even had a, this is really dating myself here, but I had a Commodore 64 computer back in the 80s that I actually programmed with my first own RPG game. I made an RPG Goonies adventure that I programmed myself. So yeah, I've been definitely into the gaming world, playing various versions of like World of Warcraft, Elder Scrolls, you name it, I've been there. Up until lately, really only like the last year have I not had time to game, which is kind of sad, but hey, there we go. I've even kind of gotten my kids into tabletop RPG, a little bit of D&D that we're dabbling in. So I never did the D&D before, and we're loving the world. It's great.
These types of books are very visual, and we don't always get the ability to be able to literally draw a picture. So the kinds of words that you use to be able to create the vision that is necessary for people to understand what kind of world this is and how really, really different it is from just like this regular mundane world. How did you develop the ability to be able to do that?
That's a great question. I think I realized kind of early on that certain words, I think just because the English language derives from other languages, certain words just bring certain ideas to the forefront of our brains, just because I think that we all are kind of very aware of a lot of the similar roots in Latin, Greek, and other languages. And things just naturally sound spooky to us or happy to us or eldritch. Tolkien was a linguistic person. He really dabbled in that, and I think that really comes out in his naming systems and his languages. And I try to do something of the same. For instance, I really do try to go back to various Arabic, Latin roots when I do kind of create my fantasy names and try to give them some type of a feeling so that it's not just a name. It's a little bit more than a name.
So what you're doing really is looking at the etymology of the word itself and going back to the original context of it and taking it and evolving that system of creating the word into the language that you need for your works.
Yes, exactly.
Very cool.
Yeah, especially like, character names, I'll try to take a language and use names from that language, but change them up a little bit. For instance, my main character, Darian, I got the idea from Persian, King Darius of Persia. Is a good one I like to use a lot. My main character, Kyle, is from a Western setting, but I changed it up a little bit, so he's Kyel, so things like that.
Do you have an interest of world history?
I have built a gigantic interest in world history. When I was in high school, it put me to sleep. It really did. But since I graduated from college, that's all I really do is I hunt for college textbooks. And I go through different eras, and I just, for fun, I'll sit there and I'll go through a textbook and take notes. So it's kind of fun. Right now, I'm deep in the middle of Bronze Age Mesopotamia and loving it.
When you do that, it expands your knowledge base. Of course, helps you with your perspective into the kinds of things that you're going to be doing from that point on. My interest right now, as far as perspective, is what is the perspective that you have in your background that helps you to be able to develop the characters and the scenarios that you do?
That's a great question. I think a lot of the development of my story really mirrors my own development in life. I started off the Rin War saga, honestly, as an atheist. I was kind of a failed Christian at the time. And that's exactly kind of where the Rin War saga starts. The gods are definitely there. They're operating in the background, but there's always kind of the question, are miracles, artifacts of divine power? Or are they artifacts of magic? And that's really definitely up in the air. And that's something that honestly hasn't been answered yet. As the Rin War saga has kind of come around, we've seen more books and gone more places to different things. I've changed my own religious perspective and kind of thrown in, I think, some layers of that into it. Not necessarily intentionally, but now that I actually know more about different religions, I can definitely look at things from different angles and see beauty in different things. And I think that those layers definitely kind of help me with my character development, help me with my world development, and add some texture to the story.
All right, so you sound very adroit in different kinds of civilizations, their language, and how different agencies of that develop. All right, so where I'm going with that is, where the hell was I going with that? Every once in a while, I'll trap myself into my own world. Psychology. We always have our own particular devices as to why we, I or others, creatives, speaking, do what they do. In that reference, when you're developing characters and you're putting them into particular situations that you know probably are going to be at some point to their peril, trying to figure out how they're going to get out of that kind of a situation, how does the psychological element play within that world for you?
That's a kind of an interesting question, because psychology of my characters is something I'm always deeply concerned about. It really bothered me when I was younger, seeing these fantasy heroes confront all of these impossible, spectacular situations and emerge scot-free psychologically, completely undamaged. And I just thought, no,
not how that works.
That's not going to happen. So I honestly have created some characters that don't start off all that great to begin with. They're pretty beat up and tattered at the beginning of the story. By the end of the story, they're downright, they're downright damaged. I've got one poor guy who's a walking case of PTSD. I mean, he really is. He gets triggered all the time by various things that happen to him that remind him of bad situations that he's gotten into in the past. One of my characters starts out with a personality disorder. She pretty much has borderline personality disorder. You don't really find out that that's exactly what's causing her behavior until about halfway through the story, but it definitely adds some dimensions. I've got one guy who's a drunk. Absolutely an addictive personality, and he owns it. He loves being a drunk, and he revels in it, and he's quite a messed up character, and it's so fun to explore him and the way he kind of handles everything just the way a drunk would. He messes everything up. So yeah, psychology is definitely something that I love to play with.
Being able to write characters like that is not as easy as what people think it may be. We all know people, fortunately or maybe unfortunately, that have those particular characteristics. Each one I find is this person that I've run across, and I've run across a bunch. Need to talk to my travel agent about that. that the astral travel agent. That might be a storyline. All right, so going and looking at this as a creative, putting it on paper, sometimes people will get very, very particular about how a character is developed, and they will have things to say about it. Have you, in your writing, after, of course, it's been published and others can read it, have you ever had someone come to you and say, I know a person that's like this, or I appreciate how you handled this particular subject?
Yeah, actually, I have. The character of Quinn, the substance abuser, I've had a lot of people come to me saying, you know, he's one of my favorite characters because I really can identify with this kind of person. I know a lot of people like them, or I am a person just like that. And so I think that a lot of people see a reflection of themselves or other people in Quinn. I've had some definite feedback on my main antagonist, who is a perfect psychopath, honestly. I don't think a lot of people would see him as a psychopath, but he is, because from the standpoint of nothing's personal, everything's business, and he does everything with complete dispassion. And I've had a lot of people say, wow, that's a scary, very powerful character right there. And so they really appreciate that.
Because they have absolutely nothing to lose, and they don't understand why people are going all frantic about stuff when it's just a yes or a no.
Yeah,
Period.
exactly. Black and white. There should be no confusion.
Take all the imagination, all of the drama, all of that out of it, and look at it for what exactly it is.
Yep, exactly. And what I think I really like to do is I like to actually take that exact type of black and white antagonist and kind of mirror him with a complete black and white protagonist. And I'll tell you, between the two of them, it's hard to actually figure out which one of these guys is worse.
And or which one of them owns more sanity than the other. Because
exactly,
it's going to look like they're both whacked out, and they need to go jump off a bridge somewhere.
That's exactly right. And that's exactly what ends up happening. That black and white protagonist, oftentimes, you know, people are like, wow, that's kind of crazy. You know, you were thinking he's going to be the hero of the story, but you end up kind of agreeing with the bad guys more.
A lot of times what will happen is people's natural tendency, you would think, would be to root for the good guy. But there are a lot more people out there that are rooting for these bad guys than they are the good guy, because their sense of moral character might not, you know, they may do the right thing most of the time, but there is that part of them that walks on that deviant edge that they wish that they were really like that, or had the balls or the guts to be able to do what that particular character did in real life. Luckily, we don't have a lot of people going around acting that kind of stuff out. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something I really like to do. I like to set up situations where, you know, there's no clear morally right or wrong answer. And sometimes people will make one choice or the other, and it's not necessarily the good guys who make the right choice. Sometimes it's the bad guys who do. And that's one thing I'm kind of bringing out, is that I'm trying to show good and evil more as a cultural construct. Yes, really, yes, than as an actual thing, if that makes sense.
Right. So my husband says frequently, sometimes good people do the wrong thing for the right reason.
Absolutely. And I think that's actually like very similar to what I have in my Twitter profile, which says, I write about good people who do bad things in a fantasy world.
There you go. All right, so let me think here. We've talked about your protagonist. What about your antagonist? What are 3 things that you like to have in place for your antagonist so that you can move forward with that particular character or that particular scene?
Well, I really don't have one main antagonist. Again, the whole saga is kind of about one faction versus another faction. And honestly, who's in who are the good guys and who are the bad guys kind of gets changed around and muddied up throughout the course of the series. So as far as the antagonists, what do I like? I like a range. I like a broad range. You know, on one end you have like the complete ends justify the means, you know, kind of person, that black-white, you know, psychopath basically that we were talking about. Then we have people that are kind of really trying to do bad things, but they're doing it for good reasons, and you kind of really kind of understand what they're doing. You don't agree with them, but you can understand it, how somebody can go there. Then you have people that are kind of right in the middle, but are leaning in this direction for whatever purpose or another, or maybe they're actually trying to do good, but in order to do good, they have to lean kind of towards the bad side. And again, I mix it up. About halfway through the series, there's a little flip that's done, and it's like, oh, crap. I think I've been rooting for the wrong side all this time. So.
All right, so now we're going to go to music. And so that will be the subject.
Okay.
The musical score in a film very often helps to move the film forward or to be able to give the audience perspective. What way do you go about using music as a creative to be able to help your works move forward?
Okay. Well, back a long time ago, I used to be a keyboardist in a Gothic band. And when I first started writing, I actually used to kind of create my own music to write too. But I kind of came by a broke spell and I sold my keyboards. So I was hard up for a while. I've found a new kind of group that I'm into, which is Two Steps from Hell. They create absolutely epic, almost like video game music, or even maybe epic fantasy film kind of music. I'll play it in the car, I'll play it at home, I'll play it while I'm writing. When I'm not even listening to it, it's going through my head, and it really helps me create a scene. When I create a scene, it's almost like I'm watching a movie, and the music is the soundtrack. And a lot of my best inspiration has come from listening to various tracks and just kind of imagining how the scene would play out if it was a movie in my head.
So if I asked you what soundtrack would be played while this was being read, then it would be probably a good idea for the music that you had playing in your head. And could people actually get some of that music while they're reading your work?
Yes, they actually could. Just go on YouTube and look up Two Steps from Hell. My personal favorite song by them is Archangel. So that's always a good one.
Woohoo, Two Steps from Hell. Yeah.
Yes.
Whereas I was about 5 hours previous to doing this show tonight. I'm like, all right, but you know, creatives, we push forward. All right, so I know that ML Spencer has probably got some questions for you. I'm going to give him the, I was going to give him the opportunity to be able to ask you some questions. I think I'm getting tired because I just asked you to ask your own self questions. That would have been CT Phipps that is supposed to be asking you questions, but I guess he left. He did leave a comment, though, before he left out. He said, I've actually read these books, and they're awesome.
Aw, CT's really sweet.
Very, very cool. All right, so, well, that buggers where I was going to go next because I was going to have him ask you some questions. So, all right, we're going to go to, let me see. All right, imagery, okay? That's the topic now. It's highly important when you are creating a written work for the imagery, the words to be able to come off the page and actually help surround the individual who's reading this particular work. So what kinds of methods do you use to help create your imagery?
That's a great question. Imagery is so important to me. Once again, I do a lot of just imagination exercises where it's almost like meditation, you know? I clear my mind and put myself in the setting, and I kind of just look around and I see what's there. And then I try to evoke words that would put the reader in a similar setting. especially if I can evoke some type of emotion that actually goes with the descriptions of the imagery. I'm not a writer who can write 100,000 words a day. I'm really not, because I really do labor over every single word that I select for that very reason. I try to use very powerful words that bring, about the, the best imagery and the best kind of tone and just experience of the setting for the reader.
Absolutely. All right. So when you're going through that particular process, do you have any visuals of your own that you use? Anything maybe that you found on the internet, or something that you've drawn, or something that someone else has drawn, to be able to help focus you and move you to a different direction?
I don't think I have anything visual that I actually draw from. Again, I almost like act out the role too. I will actually act out scenes. I mean, I'm a crazy person to look at when I drive. I mean, God help another person in the car next to me, looking at me driving, because they'll be like, there's this crazy woman next to me who's making all these strange motions and who's she arguing with? Is she on a cell phone? What's going on? No, that's just me acting out in character exactly what I'm going to write that night. And, I do it whenever I'm alone. People will burst in on me at work. I'm like, oh, who are you talking to? Oh, nobody.
My co-host is an actor, and what he likes to ask is the question about method acting. We have method actors who will just go in and just immerse themselves into whatever the process is. But we also have found that we have method creatives who are authors, screenplay writers, all of that. And they will find themselves doing exactly what you said, because it is important to know whether or not the tone of the particular passage is going to sound right. Sometimes what they can do too is get a round table of people to be able to actually read through the script or the manuscript and see how they get the feel of it, if it is actually authentic.
Right. That makes sense. Unfortunately, I do not have the luxury of having a round table. That would be awesome, though. That's a great idea. I'm going to have to hire some people.
Right? Because you're moving up there in the scale of things, and it looks like some of the works that you have could move themselves well into either a feature on Netflix or into a larger screen. So it would be something that would be very valuable for you to do.
It's not a very bad idea. I am part of a critique group, and we definitely read out loud each other's work occasionally, but we've never actually take turns reading from different roles. That's definitely something that I should explore. Thank you for that idea.
You're very welcome. All right, so let me think here. We did that. How do you portray women in your work, or do you?
Oh, I definitely do. I've got women that are both good and bad. One thing I can say about my women is I'm pretty sure they're almost all strong characters. I do not have one weak woman. They're very real characters. I do not like women who overpower men simply because they're women, or making the men diminished in the work. None of my men are diminished, but my women are powerful in and of their own right. The real evil one is exceptionally powerful. She really is. She's probably the strongest woman in the work, and she is a very intensely scary antagonist. From my point of view, I think she's the scariest one I have. Then I have some very heroic women too that are very capable and powerful. Pretty much the ruler of the known world is a woman in my series, and she's a very capable governing person. I don't always agree with all of her decisions, but she definitely is coming from what she thinks of as the right point of view.
That's very cool, and I appreciate that, because especially in movies, you see a lot of women, and there are men in there, and the men are these big, strong macho, or maybe not even big strong macho, but they're still out doing whatever the heck else is going out there, and the women are like, "Oh, save me!" And I'm like, just
No.
here, because a lot of the horror movies, especially the B movies, you'll have more boobs and butt than you will women actually thinking, well, wait a minute, if I go out there and I see that, I'm not gonna want to do that because I'm not gonna survive out of that. No, they're like, oh yeah, let's run to the whatever the heck it is so we can trip and fall and get caught, and terrible things happen to us. I'm like, who writes this stuff? Is a lot of times what I say to my husband as he's watching these things. So we don't watch them too much together anymore. But but then on the other side of that, it's brain candy. And when you're watching something, to be entertained with, it's a little bit different, I guess, than if you're watching it as maybe like an epic or something like that you really want to get very, very involved with.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think the one thing that I really like in a woman character especially is just the women in my books can really employ logic and reason, I think, even far better sometimes than a lot of my men can. That's their weapon, that their weapon of choice. A lot of them are very pragmatic, and they tell the men exactly what they're doing wrong, why it's wrong, and where they should be going instead. And sometimes they can do that in very choice ways.
All right, so humor is very, very important in the creative work of many different genres. How do you employ humor into your work so that it gives it a more realistic feel?
Okay, good question there. My stories tend to be very dark, and my main characters tend to be very grim. So humor is actually very important to my books. Otherwise, it would be just this great, dark, dreary, hopeless place that nobody would want to be. So I do have the occasional, I wouldn't say the occasional comic characters. I do have my comic characters, and sometimes they are my main characters, honestly. Like the drunk guy I talked to you about. He's an intellectual drunk. And he comes up with some of the best lines. I mean, I swear I should just come up with big quotes or something and just hang his quotes on the wall, because he is one sarcastic dude.
What is something that he would say?
Let me think of one of my favorite Quinn quotes here. You had to put me on the spot like that. Hold on.
That's my job.
Oh, there's not enough wine in the world to sustain the delusion it takes to maintain my sanity. Something like that.
Been there, done that.
Let's see here. What's another good one from him? Yeah, he's walking by this one girl. He looks at her and says, "I'm really sorry the years haven't been kinder to you." So he's a smart ass.
I've heard my husband say that out loud in public. I'm like,
No, that's not what you want to hear.
Not an inveterate drunk either. You should catch him when he is drinking. That's you might get some more good lines from there. All right, so more or less, though, in your works, it is more of a melancholy humor than, say, a more cheerier kind of humor.
Yeah, definitely. It's more of a melancholy humor. A lot of my characters don't take themselves all that seriously and use themselves as their own sarcastic wit. Self-deprecation is definitely a big part of it. But it keeps things a little bit lighter. It keeps the levity going, and so the reader just doesn't want to completely throw the book across the room and this is all hopeless.
Sometimes so. If they do take the book and throw it, it's because it has hit a nerve.
Yeah.
Of some kind. and they may not exactly like it. Have you had any of your fan base write to you and say that that particular passage hit such a strong nerve that it recalled things for them that they maybe weren't prepared to recall?
I haven't had anything that specific. I have had a couple people write me about my character who has the borderline personality disorder, and just did not like that character. Really reminded them of somebody in their own life, and had one person that one-starred me and said, "I'm never reading this book again." And I'm really sorry that this affected you this way.
Because of the topics, or what I would say, maybe not topics, but because of the fact that you use people in your work that could very well walk off the page and be right there in front of you as a living person, that form of realism that you put into it is also a point of being extremely scary.
Yeah,
And
that's
you
very
do
true.
write in the world of darkness. So talk a little bit about that and how it has, I'm going to take it this way, how it's affected you.
Well, obviously I chose to write this for a reason. I grew up in a house of alcoholics. My mom had probably borderline personality disorder herself. That's actually who I based that particular character on. And I've had some people in my life that just weren't really all that nice or all that good. And I've had some good people who meant well, but maybe were not, their actions were not always the best choices. Let's just put it that way.
Right.
So definitely my work does mirror my own experience, and these people do walk out of my imagination, but they're also sometimes reflections on people in my own life sometimes, or variations of that, or even a response to a person in my own life, somebody I wish had been there but wasn't there, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, so how do you begin your creative process when you're working on a new piece? What is it that you do?
That's easy. I kind of have a little ritual, and I've had this ritual ever since I was like probably 13. I pick up some random Stephen King novel. Why Stephen King? Imagery. Because he is a master of imagery. And all it takes is me reading one sentence of Stephen King, and all of a sudden I can do imagery too. It's almost it's almost infecting. It transmits. And I'll close my eyes and I'll imagine, okay, I'm in this place. What do I feel? What do I smell? Am I cold? Am I hot? What's going on? Is there something creepy? Is there something wonderful? Is there something beautiful? And then I'll just start typing and it'll appear. Now, when I do start typing, though, I don't usually start with exposition. I start with dialogue. And I'll basically write a whole script of something, and I'll go back and I'll fill in the narrative around the script, around the dialogue. And that's pretty much how I write. Dialogue first, then fill it in with the narrative. And
All right.
One thing leads to another.
Now we're on the subject, literally, of dialogue. There are some creatives where dialogue can come to them like that, and it's like not a problem. And they might have maybe a little bit of a situation with doing something else in the works, but the dialogue just snaps. But then there are other people that it's like pulling teeth, and they really have to work, and that part of that process is one of the most tedious things that comes to creating a particular piece. For you, it seems like you are in the first boat where it comes relatively easy. Now, of course, correct me if I'm wrong, but
no, dialogue's easy.
If it does come easy for you, in what do you attribute that ease?
That's a great question, because I am not a naturally social person. So the fact that dialogue does come easy is strange. I think it's because I saturate myself in my story, and I wear the character around. You know, like you said, some actors will actually assume a character and they'll live that character and they'll submerge themselves in that character, and that's exactly what I do. Throughout the course of my day, I'll be one of my characters. So when they open their mouth, it just comes out. You know, it doesn't really take a lot. They'll have their own ways of speaking, their mannerisms that are different than any other person in the book. And I never really have a problem going from one person to the next to the next. I don't know why. It happens very easily to me. It's the narrative that I labor over.
Do you think that there is any dissociative tendency that you may or may not have that allows for that creative ease to happen?
Very possible. I'm quite positive that I have Asperger's, and I know that I have a lot of weaknesses, but that gives me a lot of strengths too.
Yes.
Definitely. I think more than a normal person, I can sit there and focus on a story or a character forever, literally. That would drive other people nuts.
For some who have Asperger's, one of the things about them is that they are specific in the detail. Mm-hmm. Everything about that particular, I mean, you could talk about a snowflake and they will give you the exact how big it is and what exactly it looks like inside, and maybe be a little surprised that we can't see all of those details. Or maybe in something like this, where if you just look at the larger picture, someone from that particular area will look at it and go, yeah, but look at all of this other stuff that's going on that when you at first glance don't see it. So I think that is part of the reason why people are so very enthralled with your work, because you don't just give them kind of a small chunk and have them, just go ahead and fill in all of those little small things, that you actually give them some of those pieces.
Yeah, definitely. I do try to fill in as much detail as possible, at least not to the extent it's going to start slowing down the pace of the story. But right. I do want them to be there. I do want them to see what I see. I don't want there to be a lot of guessing. And I know some authors actually like to have the reader supply a lot of those things. I personally like to provide it. That's just my own style.
And if you probably try to write it that other way, it would probably be like pulling teeth for you.
Oh, it would be painful. Yeah. It really would.
This is a wonderful way to be able to use what you've been given naturally to be able to help someone who enjoys that genre be able to enjoy it more.
That's true. Never thought about that way, but absolutely.
Very cool. All right, so I really enjoyed the covers on these works. Whom I should say is responsible for creating these really amazing covers?
Thank you. I love my cover artists. The one behind me here.
Yes, I see
that's my book 2 cover. That was created by Fat Puppy Art. Claudia, actually, she is in California, and she has a photographer who's out of Boston, and we actually picked out the models and photographed the models in Boston, and Claudia here in California did the background and the photoshopping and everything. She's very talented.
All right, so I don't know a whole lot about art and stuff like that, but I know what I like, and of course I stole that line from somebody, I can't remember who. I think it was W.C. Fields who might have said that, but I'll have to check. Anyway, what is happening now in the cover world for for books, both indie and publishing houses, the big brand publishing houses, is they are finding that people are not as happy with covers that are just kind of generic.
Mhm.
And what they're looking for is getting models to be able to place them in a situation, some part of whatever the book is, a book scene, and doing it like that. It has a different kind of a feel to it. And
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons why the cover stands out. First part of advertising for a author is, what does their cover look like? And then they flip it around the back and they go and they say, if they like what they see, and hopefully there's a picture of the author or some such on the back of it. But that front cover is the doorway to being able to get that book picked up in the first place.
Absolutely.
Why did you, or was it your decision to do these particular live models?
Well, this was my decision. And I wanted something that not everybody else would have. I see too many books that use too much the same stock art.
Right.
Even if it comes out of New York, I mean, it's like,
Right.
wow, there's that same floating girl, or there's that same raven. I wanted something that nobody else would have, and I was willing to pay a little bit extra to get it. This guy we picked out of a modeling agency, and we picked him out for one reason specifically, and that was the look on his face. We wanted somebody that can project that kind of dark, brooding mystery, and that's why I picked him up.
It's very well done. So then once that model was taken, do you know what the process was for creating the cover?
Yeah, she picked out some stock art behind him, but then she kind of layered it and took images of one stock art and overlaid them with a different one and stuff like that. Now, this is just for this cover too. Honestly, the other two books are made by a different cover artist entirely. Same kind of process, but just a little bit changed up.
Right. That one though stands out like the most. That system of doing that is not cheap,
No.
but when you are putting a work together and you want it to have the attention that it deserves, you need to be able to take it to that level. Now, I've actually taken some photos of actually some of my kids, and done artwork like apocalyptic themed.
Oh, nice.
And I've gotten a lot of really great reactions from it. Right now, what I would like to do is see if we can get some of that stuff on front covers, because I think that it would be a different kind of perspective, like what you're doing here. It's very, I wouldn't say it's innovative, but it is on that edge where people are going to be having to look and say, hey, we need to step this stuff up, else we're going to get left behind.
Well, it's a lot of fun too. Like the cloak he's wearing, I don't know if you can see this, but I actually embroidered the star on the back myself, shipped it to Boston, along with purchased like some of the other things that he's wearing. And so I got to actually like really make it mine,
It's the details of what you're putting. Not only are you detail oriented with the words that you choose, but that the cover is a very detail oriented as well, and that goes along with making the work on a classy scale, which is really cool.
Thank you. Well, I'll put it this way. If it wasn't like this, it would bug me too much and I'd have to change it. That's all it comes down to.
It's not right. Fix it.
Yep.
All right. So, do you know that we are now at 11:54 p.m., almost at the midnight witching hour? I am absolutely thrilled to have had you on the show. What I would like you to do right now, if you would please, is talk about any social media that you may have, any kind of projects that you are working on with anyone else, if there is that, and if you're going to be at any conventions or writing workshops or anything like that, and or give a shout out to anyone that you find in particular that has helped you within the last, say, couple of years.
Okay. Wow, that's quite a long list. I'll try to get to it all. Well, if you want to know my social media connections, you can always find me on Facebook, just ML Spencer. You can find me on Twitter. That's at MLSpencer1, or you can look for me on my website, which is mlspencerfiction.com. Projects I'm working on now, I'm trying to write book 4 in the Ren War saga. I am so close to the end, I could taste it, and I just can't quite get it out. I'm pretty particular, and it's got to come out a certain way, and it's not doing that. It's being stubborn. So I'm going to try to browbeat it over the course of the next 2 weeks until it comes out, something of what I want it to be. Meanwhile, I'm signed up for a couple of anthologies. So I've got some short stories that are going to be coming out pretty soon. One is called the Ragged Heroes Anthology, which is going to be coming out in January. And honestly, I can't say the name of the other one because I'm not authorized to yet.
Okay, but can you say
it should be pretty good.
House or publisher that this first one that you mentioned will be by?
The first one is actually a collection of independent authors, definitely. The second one is a mix of very larger authors and independent authors too.
No, but who is publishing the first one?
The person who's actually kind of putting it all together is another dark fantasy author. His name is Andy Poloquin.
Okay, cool. All right, so plug for him. That's good.
Yeah.
So your first time on Zombiepalooza Radio, and I know that you don't create, at least right now, in apocalyptic. What did you think about being on a show titled Zombiepalooza Radio Live, talking about your work?
I honestly think I fit in really well here because even though I don't write zombies, it is apocalyptic. And actually, one of the short stories I wrote is going to have zombies in it. So I honestly don't feel like I'm too far away from home. I really don't. And I think that you're an awesome host. I've had a great time. You've asked some very, really thought-provoking questions that I really enjoyed answering. So anytime you want me to come back, I'll be more than happy to be on your show because this has been a blast.
All right, so sometimes what I do is I stray completely away from horror and apocalyptic, and I do works where I'll schedule a group of writers and maybe do like a panel or do something from a publishing house where they're all collected. So what I would like to do is offer the extension when that anthology comes out to let them know that I would be interested in bringing it and having you as one of the guests on that particular show.
Oh, very good. I think they'll be very excited to hear that.
Thank you
Definitely.
very much. All right. Well, we are at 11:58 a.m. I am sans my dead door and James Barker, who had to go and tend to a personal matter. So this is Jackie Chin. This is like totally Zombiepalooza Radio Live. We are officially in our 5th year. Very excited to be able to keep this show going. If you know anyone that you think would be a very good fit for a guest, please send them over. Also, for those who are going to be listening to this after it is fully rendered tomorrow or after, please like, share, subscribe, all of that. I don't know where the buttons are because DD never tells me. And take care of yourself, all right?
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. You can go ahead and up to the top where the red phone is and go ahead and click that. And, well, I guess that's all, folks. I'll talk to you later. Thank you for watching Zombiepalooza Radio Live.